They may look like people, but they're not. Humanoids, at least in the sense of the word as I'm using it here, are creatures that may be shaped like people, or even behave like us, but they are something far more disturbing. From encounters with Bigfoot to terrifying unexplained monsters, these are allegedly real sightings of humanoid creatures in the forest. If you have a scary experience, share it with us at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear encounters that took place in the snow. If you enjoy this show and want to support it, like this video and share it with friends and family. Also, do you believe in Bigfoot? Comment your answer below, and maybe even link us to some evidence that helped you make up your mind. Now, let's begin. The Whistler, from Spidermilk. My family moved out to Texas almost 5 years ago, and for most of that time we've lived in a spacious suburban house that we now own. I live with my mom, younger sister, her dog, and my 2 cats. This all started the summer of 2016, when the mobile game Pokemon Go was reaching the height of its hype and popularity. Despite my extreme dislike of hot weather, I wanted to hop on that bandwagon, so I'd venture out into the neighborhood while using the app in search of virtual Pokemon to catch. While out one hot, humid afternoon, I ran into another kid who turned out to be playing the same game. We exchanged greetings and chatted for a while at the local park. I'll refer to him as Brandon. Brandon was down to earth, upbeat, and sweet. He clearly wasn't afraid to gush about what games he liked to an otherwise total stranger, but I didn't mind. His attitude put me at ease. We eventually parted ways, but I met him several other times during the summer. It was a Saturday when things in the neighborhood began to get weird. In Texas, the cicadas or cicadas get really loud at certain times of the year. They sound like millions of dead leaves rattling in the breeze, droning on for hours on end. And it's a good thing that I tended to tune it out, or else it would have bothered me much more. Anyway, that weekend, I hadn't been out playing on the app for a few days. I was eager to meet back up with Brandon and the occasional other kid that I'd run into now and again. I was out walking for probably a little over an hour before I finally found Brandon jumping down the 3 steps from what must have been his house. He saw me straight away, waved, and jogged over. We hung out and played the game for a while, but the sun was beginning to get low in the sky, so I was getting ready to tell him I had to head back home soon. Although I knew the neighborhood fairly well, my mother wouldn't be happy if I came back after dark. But I didn't get the chance to bring it up before both of us stopped in our tracks, facing the end of a road where it opened up into a small field, a private property. A shrill noise had just come from somewhere in the distance. Now, I'm not a superstitious person at all. I enjoy a good scary story now and then like everyone else, but I didn't actually fear anything magical or supernatural. I'm a logical person. Brandon, on the other hand, was clearly on edge. The sound had been short, but the way it had cut through the dull, distant noise of traffic, that was certainly strange. "You good?" I piped up after a minute, nudging the kid, and he nodded quickly. "Psh, I'm fine. It just reminded me of what my baby brother used to say." His little brother was named Tim. I tilted my head. What did he used to say? Brandon shrugged, acting just a little too overly nonchalant about it. "It's dumb, never mind." But of course, I continued to pester him until he finally hung his head, giving a dramatic sigh. Okay. Well, Tim used to have bad dreams because of something he heard from the kids next door. They were just saying it to mess with him. After I didn't respond, staring at my friend in anticipation, he rolled his eyes. My God, fine. Tim said they told him about these rules. 2 of them, and they're only for this neighborhood." I snorted. "What rules? Like homeowners association? Keeping your lawns tidy?" Brandon shook his head. "No, more like, creepy rules. And it's more for the tracks than the actual neighborhood." To clarify, the tracks are the old abandoned train tracks that run next to the neighborhood, going right past the cul-de-sac we were currently standing in. I had walked it many times before, even crossing the bridge over the river below and exploring the surrounding dirt paths, which people frequented often to hang out and be stupid in. I had never feared that area, but that's just me. It was definitely horror movie material, don't get me wrong. A seemingly endless track in either direction, surrounded by tall trees and covered in rust, sometimes graffiti. There'd even used to be a train there, sitting motionless, but that had been removed at some point. For what reason and by whom, I have no idea. Brandon explained the 2 creepy rules to me. Rule number 1, never whistle after sundown. Rule number 2, don't look behind you. I laughed when he said that, and so did he, though he seemed more nervous about it. Getting serious, I reassured him that no whistling monster could possibly be out there, and that people were always looking for some legend to be scared of, for something other to believe in. Brandon seemed to calm down at that, and I had to head home since the sun was about to set. As I mentioned, I come to the tracks often to explore and to be in nature, so I headed there around noon one day, sometime in July. I was already overheated, but I was determined to find this one Pokemon I was looking to get. Like so many times before, I was met with the hum of cicadas as I gradually left the asphalt of the neighborhood for the bumpy terrain of the tracks. I walked for roughly half an hour, skipping the bridge in favor of heading down one of the dirt paths by the river's edge. I sat near the water for a while, switching between Pokemon Go and my social media apps as time passed by. I wasn't aware how close to sunset it was until I spotted the time on my phone. Getting to my feet, I took a drink of water from my metal canteen, trying to conserve a last sip for the walk back. That's when I got a notification on my phone. Brandon had sent me a gift on my Pokemon app. I didn't open it just yet. I was actually reminded of those rules he had talked about, and despite my skepticism, I was curious, and definitely scatterbrained. I was curious enough to wonder what would happen if I broke those rules. You could probably guess I'd be the first to be ended in a horror film. So I texted my mom to let her know I was heading back, but since I was further out than usual, I'd be back a little after dark. She wasn't happy about it, but she sternly reminded me to manage my time better next time, so at least I'd avoided a real scolding. Having bought myself some time, I pulled up Snapchat on my phone, hitting record. "Hey Brandon," I said, "I'm about to myth bust those kids' rules right now." I told the camera, and then proceeded to whistle a nursery rhyme. I think it was the Itsy Bitsy Spider. I waited in silence. After not a single scary thing occurred as expected, I turned the camera toward myself and sarcastically raised an eyebrow before ending the video. I sent it to Brandon and started walking back to the neighborhood. Weirdly enough, the noise of cicadas had died down significantly, but I figured I just hadn't noticed it until now, having been previously distracted. So I didn't think much of it. Besides, even if it had been sudden, the worst things out here were deer, coyotes, and maybe even the occasional hobo, so I wasn't really worried. Then something like a crack came from behind me. I turned and looked. Guess that was 2 rules down now. But there was nothing that I could see behind me. I do remember shivering, though. Even the most level-headed people can't shake paranoia sometimes. So I picked up the pace. The nursery rhyme I'd whistled earlier stuck on a rather annoying loop in my head as I clutched my water canteen in case some crazed individual tried to attack me. And then, just as I rounded a bend and saw the streetlights of my neighborhood, there was another noise, something dry and hollow, sounding like the howling of wind, except this wasn't wind. This was more like a long, strained echo, changing its tune subtly in the middle, almost like a whistle. At that point, I was scared, but I didn't take off running, fearing I'd attract the attention of whatever had made the sound. This place felt taboo, like it belonged to someone or something else. Suddenly, I was quite sure that I wasn't supposed to be here. My hands were starting to shake. My anxiety was ramping up until it felt like it coiled itself into my guts, ready to explode with adrenaline at the slightest snap of a twig. However, there was no snap to speak of. No more sounds, no more whistling howls. But I could see movement ahead of me in the tree line to my left, between me and the streetlights. Trees, bushes being pushed just slightly, just enough to be visible. I don't know why, but I crouched down on the train tracks. Sudden movements from me seemed like a bad idea, no matter how much my body was screaming at me to bolt. At first, the shape that stepped out of the bushes looked very much like a bear, a shaggy grayish-brown body. It was certainly long enough, maybe larger, although I wasn't sure there were any bears in Texas as far as I knew. Of course, it wasn't a bear at all, because, as it turned out, moving in the way that an ape or a man might move, but on all fours, my gaze fell on a thing that was the furthest possible entity from a bear. It was hairless for one thing. It had an emaciated, pale body with some animal hide stretched across its back as if it were armor. Its head was covered by what appeared to be a deer's skull, but I could plainly see that a grisly, deformed face and bust were hiding right underneath. All bony and stretched out, milky white eyes a stark contrast to the shadow the skull cast, and the only feature of its real face I could make out. The thing rose up, the grimy pelt of the skinned animal dragging in the dirt as it did, head twitching as it looked around. By some miracle, it didn't seem to see me at all. So I didn't move. I wanted very much to cry, to be anywhere but here, but I didn't move an inch. Not until the creature fell back onto all fours, skinny limbs splayed out like a spider's. It was then that it raised its head, and I could see its actual jaw moving as it opened its real mouth under the skull. It was awful, the sound that it made, especially up close. I knew it had been what it called out earlier, but up close I could hear the snarl underneath the otherwise soothing, eerie howl. This creature, it was a predator, and it had nearly found me, like a bat finding a moth, by a sick, dangerous game of Marco Polo. Eventually, the thing crawled back into the brush, but I didn't dare move until I saw it scale a large tree and jump out of sight. I crouched the whole way until the streetlights and sprinted back home from there. Needless to say, I haven't been back there alone since. I never told Brandon about it, but as he didn't open my teasing message, I assume he got rid of the app I'd sent it on long ago, so that didn't matter much. Here's a tip, kids. Rules are there for a reason. Don't break them. And for God's sake, do not whistle after sundown. Bigfoot in Gaston, Oregon, from Ryan. It was around 8 or so in the evening when I had my encounter. It happened a long time ago. I was 8 years old and had recently gone into foster care. I remember this sighting as if it happened yesterday. I was over at a family friend's house for dinner. They live out in Gaston, Oregon, and have a hazelnut orchard. The trees in the orchard are about 10 to 15 feet tall. They had 2 boys that my brother and I were having a Nerf gun war with, because of how big the grounds were. My brother and I were standing by the back end of the house. My brother noticed something down in the orchard. "Ryan," he said, a bit freaked out. "Look." I followed his gaze and saw what he was staring at. There was a tall figure walking in between the trees. It stood close to the top of them. That's just how colossal it was. I would guess it was about 10 feet tall, maybe just a bit shorter. We stood there, but I began to panic. "It's Bigfoot," I shouted to my brother, who was trying to keep his cool. "Be quiet," he said. The Bigfoot paused for a moment before continuing on its way. It was probably going back up into the hills to hunt before returning to the valley the next day. It was a quick but creepy encounter of mine. I've been criticized over my sighting, but I've had people fully believe my story as well. So, if you're ever in Gaston, Oregon, be on the lookout for a Bigfoot. It Hunts Me. From Rawl Brett 260. I'm 17 years old and live in Romania. I live with my grandparents because they're sick and need someone to take care of them. The story begins last year in October, the first day I moved out here. My grandmother helped me unpack my stuff, and she began to tell me the rules of the house. She explained to me that I needed to feed the animals, to help her around the house, and things like that. But one of these rules caught my attention. She told me to never, under any circumstances, leave open the back porch at night. I thought it was strange, but I shrugged it off as just another inoffensive rule. Days went by, the farm life got to me, and I began to like it. One night, I finished up my chores around the house. I went out to smoke a cigarette. It was pitch black at the time. I went closer to the back porch because my grandparents didn't know that I smoked. A few minutes passed, and I was beginning to get cold. Out of nowhere, I began to smell sulfur and iron, like something was decaying nearby. The smell grew stronger and stronger. I knew something was wrong, but the curiosity got the best of me, and I wanted to see what was going on. All of a sudden, something crashed into the fence to my right. When I turned around, my blood ran cold. There, over the fence, I saw the silhouette of a head. But the two things that made me froze were that the head appeared to have horns, and that fence was 7 feet tall. This thing was at least 1.5 feet taller than that. The next thing I knew, I was running like a bat out of heck. When I made it back inside, I was pale as a ghost. When my grandmother saw me, she knew right away what had happened. She sat next to me and began to tell me that that thing has been haunting the farm for years. And that was the reason that she told me the rule about the porch. Because that thing would only enter if it was left open. She told me that that was the thing that was behind my grandfather's death. My grandfather was found dead at the edge of the farm, and everyone blamed the population of wolves around the area. Well, everyone except my grandmother. She told me that one night my grandfather was working around the house. He forgot the back porch and left the door open. Around 11 p.m. that night, grandmother heard him scream. The only thing that she saw was a tall and skinny figure running away, all the while dragging my grandfather by the head. She wanted to tell that to someone, but everyone thought that she was crazy, old, or senile. But I've seen it now. I believe her. I've seen it since then, and every time I look at it, it shakes me to my very core. But in a different way, I think I'm getting used to it. Crack, Snap, Run from Lucky Runner. This was no normal camping trip. I knew that as soon as we got to the site. Me and my two sisters decided to go on a camping trip in Manitoba, Canada. I'm the middle sister and the most outgoing, but not foolishly so. When we got to the small campsite, we noticed how the only people there was a family who was already leaving. It was the beginning of the weekend. The family even told us that it wasn't a good idea to stay there. Apparently, a series of strange sounds and noises had scared them away. But they didn't really specify what it sounded like before driving away in their van. We were a bit put off by this, but stubbornly set up camp, determined to have a good time together. We went on a walk together down one of the trails, and I decided to climb a tree, much to my younger and elder sister's chagrin at being afraid of heights, and not following my silly idea of having fun in the forest. But while I was up there, I heard large noises far off down the path. My sisters heard this as well. The noise we presumed could be a bear or moose, or another dangerous animal. I'd climbed very high up in the tree when I was trying to show off, with them being nervous about the large rustling sounds and the grunts in the distance. They were calling for me to come down quickly. I told them to book it back to camp, as my descent was a little slow on account of me trying to be safe. I told them I'd wait for whatever animal was to pass. Then I would follow my way back to camp. I'd like to point out that it was nearly twilight. That's when the animals out here move around, going back to where they want to sleep, or the night creatures beginning to stir. They agreed after complaints from my older sister. You know the basic, "You're an idiot," and "You better not fall," before they steadily jogged away. I went down a little farther, then sat still when the noise was almost near me. Through the tree leaves, I saw something that changed my perspective on life. A massive wolf that looked stretched and skeletal. It was on the path, sniffing. My head hurt with how hard it was pumping when that thing sniffed right up to the tree I was in. I didn't dare move. It looked around, then up. Bright yellow eyes stared at me. Then the creature stood up on two legs, like a person. A scream was caught in my throat, and I tried to climb up higher, again, to get as much distance between me and that thing. I tore off branches and chucked them down at the base of the tree, hoping to drive it away. I heard a grunt, and it stepped back from the tree, then spoke in a voice so similar to my sister's, yet not.
"You're an idiot. You better not fall."
The words were more drawn out than how my sister had said it, almost like it was trying to get the right pronunciation by speaking so slow. That redoubled my terror, and I chucked more and more of this tree down at the thing. It paced around the tree, staring at me. Then I thought it decided I wasn't worth the effort, and walked off into the dim forest. After a few minutes, I descended once again, and once I reached the bottom, I looked around before making a final jump to the mossy forest floor. As soon as I landed, I heard a crack from up a tree beside the one I was in. I looked up, and the thing was up there, looking down with a predatory gaze. I mouthed the word "how," because I had no idea how it could have gotten up there so silently without me hearing. It snapped a branch and appeared to be preparing to jump, and my brain screamed to run. I was a long-distance runner in high school, winning a lot of races, and I go on nightly runs every week. But when I say record time, I will always think of this moment, as I bolted down the path, dodging trees and jumping rocks. I could hear the breath of the thing as it raced along beside me. And I know it was a race for my life. After 10 minutes, I broke from the trees into the campground, covered in tens of scratches from my panic in the trees and the desperate run through the woods. I saw my sisters laughing beside the tent, playing that game where you put your hand behind your back and you have to touch the other person. I beelined for them, screaming for them to jump into the car. They saw the blood running down my arms and legs, and when they saw their brave middle sister bleeding and running at them, screaming to get in the car, they did not hesitate. They were inside, yelling to know what happened. My older sister was in the front seat, the younger one waiting with the door open for me to jump in. But the questions died out when they saw what was following me. I've never seen such fear in their eyes. I jumped into the car and my older sister slammed on the gas. She peeled off down the dirt road trail, leaving all our camp equipment behind. It was getting dark now, and my sister weaved down the trail in our crappy silver car like a pro. Honestly, I was surprised how calm she was. We hit the main road, and she sped all the way to a gas station. She pulled into the parking lot, and they immediately grilled me, so I told them everything. We don't really keep stuff from each other. We've always been straight up honest, even when it was hurtful, sad, or in this case, terribly horrifying. It felt like they may not have believed me completely, concerning the part where it talked in my sister's voice. It clearly disturbed her when I told her about it. We were confused on if we should call someone like the police. What do you even do in this sort of situation? My younger sister was trying to stop the bleeding from the cuts on my arms and legs, and my face. I had an especially bad cut on my eyebrow that only bled more after my adrenaline left me. We were still in the woods even if we were at a gas station. The place was located off a minor backwoods highway, and we decided a $200 Walmart tent and some sleeping bags were not worth our lives to go back for. We luckily didn't put our bags with our cell phones and cameras and the expensive stuff into the tents yet, so those were fine. And we do like to make sure our clothes and things are safe and stay dry if it ever rains while camping. My older sister, being logical, decided to call the cops to make a report that there was a dangerous animal that drove us from the campsite. The authorities met us at the gas station after a couple of hours. We made our statements. We thought it was a bear. This is what we said so that we didn't appear crazy. The cops went back to collect our things for us, but they came back with nothing. Just a few pieces of shredded fabric. They closed off the campsite and the forest rangers were called in, but they never found a bear. It's been 4 years now, and we talk about it to our families. We still haven't gone back to that campsite. To whatever wolf-like creature thing that was out there, I never want to see you again, nor those menacingly yellow eyes. But you're not gonna stop us from camping, even if we have to go somewhere else. The Night Watcher, from James Y. This happened to me maybe 20 years back. I was just out of high school and was visiting my grandparents, who lived on a farm in southeastern Oklahoma, close to the Ouachita National Forest. The farm was always a peaceful place to visit. You could just sit on the porch, swing out front, and it seemed like all your troubles from home had melted away. Lots of cousins lived nearby, and they would always come over. We'd have huge country breakfasts, then some would break out their guitars and start singing. Truly felt like a magical place. Well, until the sun went down. Growing up, if I ever went outside at my grandparents' farm at night, I always got this creepy feeling. A feeling like something was watching me from the nearby woods. I would often have nightmares of something coming out of those woods to get me. Many nights sleeping in the living room on the hide-a-bed, noises in the night would stir my imagination, as if something was walking around on the front porch. Little did I know that, one day, something would indeed come out of that forest and make its presence known. One late day in my late teens, early 20s, I was lying on the bed, listening to music in the back bedroom, which we referred to as the back porch. A room was later added onto the house, which was big enough for 2 full-sized beds. It was then that I heard a scream or howl, something ungodly and otherworldly, coming from outside. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I can't even describe how scary it sounded. It was loud, and it echoed through the hills. Whatever it was just kept screaming. It was close, possibly even in the backyard. I jumped up and ran into the living room. My mom and everyone else was busy chatting and making supper. To give you an idea of my mom, and pretty much everyone else for that matter, if you were to bust in and say you heard a strange noise outside, they would just say, and go back to what they were doing. If you said, I saw something strange in the sky, or I saw some weird creature in the forest, they'd say, and go back to what they were doing. So knowing this about my family, I rolled my eyes, and I decided to investigate for myself. I walked out the back door with nothing but a camera. Okay, I was young and stupid, but I was on a mission, and I was convinced that whatever was making this sound, it was something that probably hasn't been seen very many times by man. I thought if I could get a glimpse of it, a picture of it, I could report it somewhere as a little bit of proof of strange creatures that lurk in the woods. Whatever it was moving away from me. The screaming continued, and I followed it through the backyard, through the nearby pasture, and then into the woods. Deeper and deeper I followed this thing into the woods, each moment becoming more and more perplexed as to what that thing could be. What an idiot, I thought. This thing could be a mountain lion, a panther, who the heck knows what. I could get mauled out here. But at least I could take a picture of whatever that was about to kill me, I guess. But was the thing running from me? Was it luring me deeper into the forest? And then I realized that the sun was going down. Great, I thought. It's going to get dark in a bit, and I'm stuck out in the middle of the woods with this thing. So I turned around and headed for home, always hearing that screaming in the distance behind me. By the time I made it back to the edge of the forest and made it into open pasture, it was pretty dark, and I didn't even have a flashlight to light my way. Luckily, I made it safely back to the house. Maybe a night or two later, I was staying a couple of nights with my cousin Billy, who lived just up the hill from my grandparents. I don't remember how this started, but Billy decided, and here comes me being stupid number 2, that in the middle of the night we would wake up, walk out the back door, down the hill, through the pasture, and go for a dip in one of my grandfather's ponds. Never mind that there were water moccasins and copperheads, but whatever. And for maybe 3 or 4 nights in a row, we did this. Wake up in the middle of the night, go to the back door, walk down the hill, walk through the pasture, go for a dip, then get out, walk back through the pasture up the hill again, then go back to sleep. On about the 5th night, Billy said, "Don't wake me up tonight. Just let me sleep. You can go swimming if you want, but I don't want to go tonight." "All right," I said. So that night, I just went alone. in the dark, down to the pond. Oh lordy, it wasn't long before I got creeped out and just got out of the pond. I was making my way back across the open pasture when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. There was someone else with me in that pasture. It was very dark, so I couldn't get a good look at it, but it was tall and thin, and it stood on 2 legs. I immediately froze in fear. What was it? There wouldn't be any reason for a person to be out in this pasture at this hour. Okay, well, anyone other than me. I figured this was it. Everyone's gonna find my dead body out in this field in the morning. I don't want to go out like this. I managed to squat down onto my haunches, trying to get a better look at the thing. The moon was in the background, so I was hoping I could use it to shed more light on what this could possibly be. The thing just stood there. It didn't move, and I was too afraid to move myself. I managed to stand up again. I really couldn't see it very well. All I knew is that I had to get out of there. Finally, I found enough courage where I could slowly start moving away, beginning to head back to the road leading up the hill. After a ways, I quickened my pace, and I made it back up, steadily climbing, terrified that whatever this thing was, it would be following me, and any minute it would grab me from behind, and it all would be over. I prayed under my breath, please don't let it get me, please. Back at my cousin's house, I ran inside and locked the door behind me. I got dressed and went back to bed. Billy was still asleep there, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The following day, I told Billy about what I'd seen the night before. We went down the hill to the pond and retraced my steps through the pasture. There were absolutely no trees and no posts of any kind within that pasture that I would have mistaked for a creature of some kind. It was literally an open field, with nothing much higher than a blade of grass. So what was it that I saw that night? Maybe a night or two later, I was back sleeping on the back porch at my grandparents' house. I was sleeping in the bed with windows above my head and to my right. My cousin Sarah slept in the other bed to my left. I was awakened in the middle of the night by something tapping or knocking on the window above my head. Instantly, the fear returned. There were no lights in the backyard. It was completely pitch black, so there would be no reason for anyone to be out there tapping on my window. I didn't see any light from a flashlight either. If it was a person, to what end would they be tapping on the window? And at this hour? Even more so, how did this thing know my exact location within the house? I could have been sleeping in any number of beds in the house, but no, there it was, tapping on the window above my head. The fear that I felt is uncontrollable. You can't move, you can't speak, you can't breathe. I prayed again that it would go away, but it continued to tap, and the fear rose even higher. I heard it walk on 2 legs around the side of the house, pacing as if wondering what to do. It came back to the same window and tapped again. My heart was about to beat out of my chest. If anyone could die of fear alone, I felt pretty close to it. I literally could not move to get help or scream out. I dared not look out the blinds. Then again, it may have been too dark to see anything. What seemed like an eternity passed before it finally left. But I stayed awake the entire night, too afraid to sleep. Only when I saw the sunlight creeping in was I able to close my eyes. I told everyone about it the next morning. No one really gave it much thought, though. My cousin Billy came down and we went to the backyard by the window it had been knocking at. I wanted to see how tall it would have been to reach the window. I was freaked out, and no one really listened to me, except for my cousin Roger. He was 20 years older than me. He said that when he was a kid, Roger and another cousin of mine were sleeping on the back porch when they were awakened by something tapping on the window, which freaked them out so bad that they still remembered it. This mirrored my story. What is this thing that's been around the property for at least the past 50 years now, and what does it want? I didn't spend too many more nights there on the farm. My grandparents soon were moved to a nursing home and passed away thereafter. And under strange circumstances, the house was demolished in a fire. I tried to share my story with the BFRO, or Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, but they didn't publish my story or return my call or email. I guess they thought it was too unbelievable. But was it really a Bigfoot? It was far too thin compared to reports I've heard, and it didn't sound anything like the recordings I've heard. Was it some sort of creature like the rake? A wendigo, perhaps? I'm starting to think this could have been what I experienced. All I know is that these instances happened, and it scared the heck out of me. I don't care who does or doesn't believe me. I just know what I experienced. There's something in those woods, and maybe it didn't want us there. Or maybe it was just curious. But apparently, it's been there a long time. I believe somewhere deep within those woods in southeastern Oklahoma, it's still there. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and send us your story so that I can narrate it. Just go to darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check the links below. Before I go, here are the credits to my patrons who have donated or continue to donate. They're pretty great. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Deer are such strange creatures, aren't they? They eat grass, taste delicious, go crazy from wasting disease, and now they're spreading ticks that cause you to be allergic to meat for the rest of your life. Poor things have gone from beautiful critters to creepy creatures within a decade. Because of that, we've had to discontinue our deer egg and cheese biscuits because it's just too risky. Luckily for you, I can still tell you about today's scary work stories, featuring such creepy deer, dog-sitting disasters, and the most disturbing forest in America. These are tales from the break room, and you should follow and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Dog Sitting in a Haunted House, from Cricket Girl 20. I recently began dog sitting for a family friend, only doing so when she's at her part-time job. One day, while I was dog sitting, her dog Pepper was lying on the couch next to me, while the other dog, Ray Ray, was lying on the floor next to my dog Bear. Suddenly, I heard a thud coming from the upstairs bathroom. All three dogs perked their heads up, and I stood up to go check. I didn't find anything out of place in the bathroom, so I simply told myself, "Take it easy, you're in a house you've never been in before." Despite being a firm believer in the paranormal, I did not want to entertain the idea of a ghost. As I returned to the living room, I noticed a dark shadow dart across the wall. I rubbed my eyes and said, "Snap out of it." To my relief, the rest of the day passed by without any further incidents, and my friend returned a few hours later. 2 days after that, I found myself once again taking care of her dogs. As I sat on the couch, my gaze shifted towards the TV screen, and to my surprise, I saw a figure standing beside the couch in the reflection. Startled, I quickly turned my head, only to find nothing there. Still refusing to entertain the thought of a ghost, I chose to ignore it and distract myself by watching YouTube videos about dogs. After some time, I decided to get a glass of water. I made my way towards the kitchen, and I suddenly heard a faint humming sound coming from the laundry room. Now I was frustrated. I couldn't help but shout out, "Could you please just stop?" I was surprised yet relieved when the humming ceased, so I returned to the couch, patiently waiting for my friend's return. A week after that, I encountered the most terrifying incident at her residence. While preparing a snack for myself, I noticed a candle slowly moving across the counter all on its own. Just in time, I resumed enjoying my snack and returned to the living room. However, my peace was disrupted by thumping sounds emanating from the storage room. Annoyed by all this unusual activity, I decided to investigate. As I approached the storage room, I forcefully swung the door open and was startled to find a man vigorously hammering the wall. I was paralyzed with fear, and it was only when I heard the barking and snarling of the dogs behind me that I realized they were there. Suddenly, the man just vanished into thin air. I was filled with horror. I rushed back to the living room, where I encountered my friend. Curious about my distress, she inquired, "What happened?" I proceeded to recount the strange experiences I'd been having in her house. With a sigh, she admitted to me, "I'm so sorry. I should have informed you that this house is haunted. Occasionally, I hear noises and catch glimpses of shadows, but I've never seen this man you described. Pepper and Ray Ray sometimes react to something as well, something that I don't or can't see." She embraced me and apologized once again. Eventually, I stopped dog-sitting for her, as she made the decision to return home due to her mother's illness. Despite this, we still maintain contact, and she continues to express remorse for subjecting me to such unsettling experiences. I've never disclosed to my friend the words that man spoke before he vanished. Yes, he said something. He uttered,
"She made me do it. She made me. With this hammer."
Subsequently, I began inquiring about the history of the house, and a man informed me that his great-uncle and aunt actually resided there in the 1940s. One day, his great-aunt infuriated him to such an extent that his great-uncle, in a fit of rage, took her life using an old-fashioned hammer. Following this tragic incident, his great-uncle penned a note absolving himself of blame, stating that she had coerced him into committing the act. He then consumed poison to bring about his own demise. Therefore, the man I witnessed must have been the great-uncle. I immediately contacted my friend and told her what I found out. She was unnerved and expressed even more regret, mostly for the aunt. Every time my friend comes over, she passes by the house occasionally and still feels a shiver just from glancing at it. She mentioned that the house appears deserted, except for a few stray cats who have made it their home. One day, she decided to step out of her car to sneak a peek inside through the window, only to spot a dark shadow standing in the living room. Startled, she quickly ran back to her car and drove away. For those listening or reading, I would recommend doing some research on the history of any home you plan to move into, especially if you have a belief in the paranormal. Landlords and realtors may not always disclose if any negative incidents occurred in the house. Additionally, it's important to pay attention to your pet's behavior, as they may react to things that are invisible or inaudible to you. Animals tend to be more sensitive to paranormal activities compared to us humans. Prioritize your safety and ensure there are no negative occurrences associated with the house before embarking on any remodeling projects for your new home. I should have listened, but I didn't. From Jason R. I should have listened, not just to my wife or the law, but to myself. I knew better than to tempt fate, but I went someplace I shouldn't have. I'd almost promised myself that my days as an amateur cryptid hunter had come to an end, but then an opportunity presented itself that I simply could not pass up. I should have, but stupidly, I did not. I want to start by saying I'm going to limit the number of details and specific information I provide because I did break the law. Anyone that does a little bit of research or is remotely into strange happenings and the unexplained will probably know where I went. But no one wants to dig up details when all they are looking for is a spooky story. So I'll share some of the basic details before I tell you how it all went horrifically wrong. Ever since I retired in 2022, I've sought out a new career, one that would allow me to pursue my passion for strange events and bizarre creatures that lurk in the dark. After some recent events, I have given up on this line of work and have tossed the drafts of my book. In the northeast of the US, there is a ghost town that lies hidden in the shadows of cold mountains and damp apple orchards. But it wasn't always this way. Once it was vibrant and full of people. However, that time has long since passed. Now it's a crumbling ruin, one that's been almost completely erased from history. It wasn't a downturn in the economy or the installation of a new highway that steered people away from living here. I discovered a laundry list's worth of reasons why people cleared out, ranging from the wild and bizarre like spirits or monsters and curses, to the more mundane like lead poisoning. Now, when I say crumbling, what I mean is that all that's left is a few buried foundations and the holes of where wells had once been. The place was settled only a couple decades before the American Revolutionary War kicked off. At first, the town was owned by one man, who never seemed to actually live there. Before long, however, another brave soul decided to actually put down roots in the region. He, in turn, invited his relatives to come join him. And that's when everything started to go wrong. You see, the trio of brothers had been involved in a treacherous plot back across the pond, one which cursed their family for all time. This curse was simple enough. Their family would never know any peace. They and their descendants would spend their lives in terror before meeting untimely deaths. Even before they left for the new world, tragedy struck time and time again. A little thing like a trip across the Atlantic couldn't save them, could it? Some say that the brothers were not cursed at all, but rather, they moved onto land that was stained with some unknown and supernatural evil. I visited Virginia in search of this idiotic-sounding bunny man cryptid. What I found instead of a psychic rabbit was a town that was just wrong. It was like the area was covered in a bloody stain that could not be removed. I think that the place I'm telling you about now is similar to that, but worse. Like much of the region, the private property on which the old town once stood is overgrown with trees and brush. There are rocks and boulders everywhere you go. You can pick out the area where the town once stood by its semi-level nature. Again, I don't want to mention the place by name, but it couldn't have been given a more foreboding moniker if the people who once lived there tried. Anyway, back to today's history lesson in misery. As families are wont to do, the brothers got married, and their family expanded into a small community. Now, I mentioned that the area is covered in trees, but this doesn't adequately describe just how dense the foliage is. It's like sunset takes place in the middle of the day. I found it surprising that several families would join those who helped settle the region, but they did, and more people moved deep into the hills of this cold land. The town, I think I'll just refer to it as the town, to make the anonymity somewhat easier, was never what one would call lucky. Besides the deaths, There were the others. You see, there were these mysterious creatures, sometimes spotted just beyond the tree line, and wherever they were seen, madness soon followed. Cynics will try and tell you that illness, death, and people losing their minds happen every day at all points across the globe, and they're right to say that. But when it came to the town, the numbers far exceeded virtually every other town in the US at that time, and ever since. For reasons that have not been explained, several of the town's original settlers moved away. They went on to have rather boring lives before passing away of natural causes. When I discovered this, it kinda convinced me that whatever was going on up here, it wasn't a curse. But one settler, I'll call him Mr. J, stayed behind. And he went mad before eventually becoming destitute and living on the charity of those who still remained in the small community. This all took place prior to the beginning of the 19th century. The spread of madness continued, as the dying began. As he descended into madness, Mr. J's good friend, Mr. G, was killed at his neighbor's house. His neighbor in turn also went insane. But before he lost his mind and succumbed to madness's embrace, the neighbor began speaking of strange creatures that he allegedly saw lurking out in the dense forest. He said, at night, these mysterious beings would emerge from the undergrowth and stalk the surrounding woodland. But more on them later. For now, I'd like to provide you with a summary of some of the other events that took place within the space of about 18 years. One family was totally wiped out during a Native American raid. Plagues swept through the area, killing off large portions of the population. One woman was struck dead by a lightning bolt, of all things, on her own front porch, and other horrific events took place with a deadly frequency that no other town could match. While all this hell was taking place, more and more people began to lose their minds. Only as time progressed, things took an ominous turn. When their minds finally broke, they began wandering off into the woods. One strange event is nothing, just an anomaly, right? Twice is a little stranger. But as time went on, more and more people disappeared into the forest, never to be seen again. The surviving members of the town simply could not handle all the bizarre happenings that were devouring their community. So they began to leave. I always try to be fair whenever I research any location, and the town is built in a rocky, wet notch of land where it's hard to grow enough food to support a large population. I'm fairly certain this had a large part to play in the village's abandonment. Now that the town only had a handful of residents, it seemed as if whatever was consuming the area fixated on those who still remained, with an ever-growing hunger. Despite everything, one person, Mr. B, chose to remain with his family. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his days, which turned out to be few. Not long after he made the decision they would stay, his wife died. And shortly after she was laid to rest, his children wandered out into those cursed woods. They too were never seen again. But the darkness was not through with Mr. B. Oh no, his house caught fire and burned to the ground. It was likely too much for him to bear. Maybe he just wanted to be with his kids and family again. Maybe the entities in the forest had finally gotten around to him. Whatever it was, Mr. B joined so many others, vanishing without a trace into the dark groves clustered around the town. At the start of the 20th century, the town had been officially deserted. The houses there began to rot and sink into the ground. The forests had finally succeeded in taking back what belonged to them. A Mr. C and his wife were a well-to-do couple who fell in love with the area and decided to build a home there. The first signs of trouble appeared when they tried to get builders to come in and build their dream home. All of the men he reached out to flat out refused. If only Mr. C had listened to the voices that were surely all but shouting in his head at this strange behavior, things could have been different. Sadly, he didn't listen. He was an intelligent man, sure, a surgeon in fact, so he likely would have deduced that something was off. But rather than be dissuaded, he bought about 1,000 acres of land and began building his dream home by himself. In the end, as the cliché goes, it would transform from a dream into a nightmare. As I mentioned earlier, the couple planned on using the home as a getaway, a place where they could spend free weekends or a summer. Well, during one summer, Mr. C got called back to the big city for an emergency operation. Bidding his wife goodbye with promises he'd be back as soon as he could, he headed off to work. A day and a half passed. It had only been 36 hours. When he returned to the outer fringes of the forest, things felt immediately off. The night birds and owls, who'd once provided their little getaway with a cozy charm, now seemed to be threatening to claim his very soul. Everything screamed at him to get out. He ignored the feeling and went to check on his wife. Why hadn't she met him at the train station or even on the road? If the legends are to be believed, the answer was simple. They had come for her. Just like many others, whatever calls those woods home found her, alone and unprotected, in her home. Like so many others, they drove her mad. Mr. C found his wife curled into a ball near their bed, laughing crazily. Again, this is coming from other sources, so take it with a grain of salt. But apparently, she'd been laughing so hard that her face had been stretched into an unnatural rictus grin. Terrified, Mr. C fled in search of help. He returned a short time later with emergency personnel. They retrieved his wife and brought her to the nearest hospital. Between her fits of deranged laughter, she told them that strange creatures had come out of the forest and attacked her. And just like many other townsfolk before her, whatever was in those woods drove her mad. Not too long later, she took her own life. The good doctor would go on to remarry. He, his new wife, friends, and local landowners formed a society to both protect the land and to ensure it would never be developed. Since then, tales of strange lights in the woods, apparitions that reach out to touch, shove, and attack unwary travelers, and, as always, unnatural beings wandering through the woods, became rampant. And wherever these stories pop up, the madness soon follows. Maybe that's what convinced me, or deluded is probably the better word, to steer far off the course my wife and I were on, to sneak onto private property to have a look around. Yes, I know. Stupid, right? But it all began as a quick peek into what sounded like the mines of Moria. No big deal. What it became was something far more horrific than I could have ever imagined. God only knows why, but my wife loves me, so she made sure there was someone along for the ride to protect her dim-witted husband. My wife and I picked up a little German Shepherd puppy a while back. We named him Fievel. Yes, I know that's the name of a cartoon mouse, but it fit him somehow. Anyway, she sent me on my way with our happy little pooch and a kiss. Excluding having a wet nose occasionally shoved into my face or rubbed onto my hand, the first leg of the trip was pretty nice. The winding roads are idyllic, if lonely. As I said before, the tree cover is unimaginably thick where we were at. It was only 11 a.m., but it felt like it was 8 at night. The temperature seemed to drop the further we ventured in. Even more troubling was how Fievel started to behave. He went from slobbering and panting happily to nervously twitching around, tucking his head below the dash. I didn't notice this until later, actually. My mind was too focused on finding the boogeyman to notice at the time. But after what happened, later, I realized he was scared. Sure enough, we got to where we were heading. And by where we were heading, I mean I got out of the car every so often and wandered around a bit, before getting back in the car and driving further down the winding road. Now, this is the part of the story where I'm supposed to say that Fievel became more agitated the further we went. Except that's not what happened. No, once the little guy got quiet, he stayed that way. I should have listened to what he wasn't saying, but I didn't. Like I said, it's dark out there, and the further we went, the darker it seemed to get. That's why it was so easy to see the lights. People always describe eyeshine of whatever monster that they'd caught sight of as having glowing red or yellow eyes. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking at. For a moment, I considered that they might be lightning bugs. But then I reminded myself, lightning bugs give off a greenish-yellow glow. But these, they were blue. And before anyone suggests they were eyeshine, at that time I wasn't shining a light, and they were off to either side of the road. The one thing I forgot to mention is that some accounts say that something else has seeped into the town. Lead. Either that or some other toxic substance. This would explain the madness, the visions of strange apparitions, and so on. As terrible as that is, and as perfect an explanation as it could be, it doesn't account for the people who did not spend a lot of time there, and it doesn't account for what happened to Fievel and myself. I promised myself that I'd file this event away in the darkest part of my mind, forever. But most of you, just like me, probably frequent other channels that post scary true stories. I saw a story about blue-eyed devils. I thought other people have experienced the same thing I did. Unfortunately, the video detailed Sasquatch spotted on Edwards Air Force Base. This isn't what we encountered, not by a long shot. But that video was what motivated me to finally write down what happened to Fievel and me. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked my forlorn little friend. He didn't make a sound. Occasionally, he would flick his head this way and that, before finally staring out the passenger side window. Fievel's silence became so unnerving, I was finally starting to think about turning us around. It was around this time that I became aware of something fluttering at the back of my mind. A yearning or desire? I'm not sure what it was. I only knew that I wanted to go outside for a walk. So I stopped the car. I opened the door, and I went out for a stroll. I only know this because 15 or so minutes later, I found myself walking along the roadside. I'm not sure what snapped me out of my trance. Was it my phone? Maybe a call or text came in and the beep snapped me out of it. My feet felt wet, which is what prompted me to look down. From the knees down, I was splattered in mud. What the heck happened to me? I thought. I didn't have any answers or guesses. All I knew was I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. The one stroke of good luck I had throughout all of this was I knew which direction to take to get back to my car. I sprinted until it felt like my lungs would burst before I caught sight of my car's dim lights flickering off in the distance. Seeing their brief glow filled me with hope, and I started to run even faster. Somewhere mid-stride, I realized that Fievel had not come with me, so I ran even faster than that. But it was already too late. As it stands, this story is probably going to cause Darkness Prevails more than a few problems, given what happened to the town's former residents. I'm not sure he can even use it. So I'm going to try to make what I found back at my car as safe as I can. Warning to those who are animal lovers, and those sensitive to violent imagery. I found my dog. Something had gotten hold of the poor boy and torn him to pieces. There was blood everywhere I looked. My little Fievel had never given us anything but love, and I had led him here to this unholy tract of misery. I don't know what came over me at that moment. I kept thinking about what had befallen so many people who had come to this miserable place. Did I? Yes, for a moment I thought I might have been the one responsible for my dog's death. but my hands, my physical hands, were clean. I couldn't find any blood or bruises or scratches. But I couldn't go back to my wife in the state my car or myself was in. So I used the handy wipes I kept in our automobile to clean up our car. It kept getting colder, but after all of this, I was immune to it. The cold was the last thought on my mind. I just kept wiping and crying. Every time I came across another piece, I would pick it up and place it in a tarpaulin we had in the trunk. I searched for a good long while. I think I found most of him. I wanted so badly to bury his little body, but the cursed ground out in that vile place seemed to be made of nothing but cold stone. I sought out and found a depression in the ground and placed his gentle form inside before covering it with rocks. It took me about an hour or so. By the time I was finished, it was night. I started to cry again, but I knew I had already spent far, far too much time in this god-forsaken pit. I got ready to turn the car on when I looked up, and there they were, blue eyes staring back at me. Not 1, 2, or even 10. When I was done counting, I found 14 pairs of little blue lights. I slammed the car into reverse and spun around as fast as the little hybrid could manage. Modern cars are far quieter than their older ancestors. I could swear I heard laughter and screams over the gentle hum of my engine. Once I cleared the woodline, my phone actually did ring. It was my wife. I had no idea what I was going to tell her. How could I possibly explain this horror to her? She is such a gentle soul, and through my negligence and stupidity, I had taken something precious from her. "What do you mean he's gone? Where is he? What have you done to—" She stopped herself from saying what she was thinking. Instead, she gave me a look that I will never forget or recover from. It wasn't exactly rage, sadness, or confusion. The look on her face was sheer disappointment, and it was clear she no longer trusted me. We returned home without our little friend, our Fievel. Things are different now. The warmth is gone. It's almost like the coldness I discovered up north followed us and took up residence in our home, and it's all my fault. Every so often I'll catch her looking at me out of the corner of my eye. I've taken to sleeping on the couch more and more often. The closeness we once held for each other is no longer there. But that's not the worst of it. I catch myself thinking about going back. Not because I want to visit the shabby grave, the one I made for Fievel, but because I want to walk in those woods again. For those of you who know the place I am discussing and are considering scheduling a trip of your own there, don't do it. Stay home. If you must go to some mysterious site, pick the Northwest or Skinwalker Ranch or any place but where I was foolish enough to go. When I first set out, I thought this was my job, a new, exciting journey I was undertaking that could lead me to a career as a paranormal investigator or an author. I know better now. This wasn't some job or hobby I was undertaking. It was a fool's journey that led to the death of my best little friend. Even if my wife one day forgives me, I will never forgive myself. When Deer Hunt Dogs, from Sarah M.J. For the last few years, I've been babysitting for this family named the Morgans, ever since their daughter Ellie was born. The Morgans are friends of my family. To me, they're like extended relatives, rather than employers or friends. The arrangement I have with them is great. They usually call me whenever they need a date night or had to work late, and I'd come over to watch Ellie and take care of their 2 dogs, named Moose and Sadie. Moose is a chocolate lab with more energy than sense, and Sadie is a border collie, who's probably smarter than me. The best part about babysitting for the Morgans was that they have this beautiful 2-story colonial tucked back on about 2 acres of property. Their backyard is huge, bordered by dense woods on 3 sides, with an 8-foot privacy fence separating their manicured lawn from the wild forest beyond that. I always loved babysitting there. Ellie was one of those eerily quiet toddlers who would play contentedly with her blocks for hours, and the property was just gorgeous. During the day, if you're on the other side of that privacy fence for whatever reason, you could usually spot or hear deer grazing at the tree line, sometimes as many as 6 or 7 at a time. The place was peaceful. That was before a certain spring. The first time I heard the howling, I had just put Ellie down for the night. It was around 8:30 p.m., still light enough outside that the shadows weren't too deep yet. I was letting Moose and Sadie out for their evening bathroom break when I heard the howl, which didn't sound like any coyote or wolf or dog I'd ever heard before. It didn't even sound like it came from the same family of vocal cords. Needless to say, it chilled me to the bone when I heard it. Moose and Sadie froze mid-step, and I saw their ears pin back. Then Sadie let out a low whine. "Come on, guys," I called nervously, keeping my voice low. "Do y'all's thing and we'll go back in." They hurried through their routine as if they understood me, both of them staying very close to the porch. When the howl came again, echoing through the trees, I didn't wait for them to finish. I just said, "Let's go, inside." Back inside, warm and safe, I just told myself it was a wild dog, or at worst a strange coyote. Deep woods like this can make things sound kind of weird, don't they? I mean, I'd grown up in the suburbs, so I'm not exactly a wilderness expert. By the time Mr. and Mrs. Morgan came home at 11, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined how unsettling it had been. The second time I babysat after that initial incident, I of course heard it again. And this time, it seemed closer. The Morgans had asked me to let the dogs out every couple of hours throughout the evening. Moose had a weak bladder, bless his heart. Ellie had been a dream as usual, falling asleep by 7:30. I'd taken the dogs out at 8 with no issues. At 10 o'clock, I felt a little nervous for some reason. The moment we stepped onto the back porch, both dogs went all stiff. The howl came almost right away, much closer than ever before. If I had to guess, about 50 yards in the woods. It was followed by another sound, something like a grunt and wheeze mixed together, and it made my skin crawl. "All right, change of plans," I muttered, beckoning the dogs back toward the door. "You two can just hold it for a while." But Moose, being Moose, had already started down the porch steps. That's when I made my first real mistake. I let him go. Maybe I thought he would do his business quickly and come back. Maybe I was too focused on that horrid sound coming from the forest. Whatever the reason, I stood there at the door with Sadie while Moose trotted out into the yard. And then I heard the crack of wood, the rustle of leaves, and Moose's sharp yelp of pain, all in under a second. I ran. God help me, I ran out into that dark yard without even thinking. Sadie was barking frantically behind me, still standing on the porch, too afraid to come out here. My phone's flashlight swept across the lawn until I finally saw Moose. He was limping near the back fence and whimpering. But that's not the only thing I saw. A massive buck, easily one of the largest I'd ever seen in my life, was in the process of clearing that 8-foot privacy fence. No trouble at all. It jumped with a grace and power that seemed impossible for an animal that size. For just a second, as it reached the top of the fence, it turned its head, and it looked directly at me. I'll never forget the way those eyes looked. I swear they had no eyeshine at all, like they were eating the light from my flashlight. Then it was gone, vanishing into the dark beyond the fence with barely a sound. I went over to Moose, who was holding his front right paw off the ground, still whimpering. When I got to him, I could see blood matting the fur. It looked like he'd caught it on something, perhaps a nail or a piece of fence, but there was nothing sharp nearby that I could find. The wound, though, was deep. I carried all 70 pounds of him back inside, which was not easy. I got Sadie in too and locked the door. I was a panicked mess as I cleaned Moose's paw as best I could, wrapping it in gauze from the first aid kit. He'd stopped whimpering but kept licking at the bandage, his eyes darting toward the back door every few moments. When the Morgans came home at midnight, I had to tell them everything. I told them about Moose's injury, about the buck jumping the fence. I hadn't yet mentioned the howling, though, or the eyes, or the way every instinct I had was telling me that something was very off about this situation. Mrs. Morgan was apologetic and concerned. She knelt right down to check Moose's paw herself. "Oh, you poor baby. Sarah, I'm so sorry this happened. We've never had issues with deer getting aggressive before. Well, that buck cleared an 8-foot fence like it was nothing. I didn't even know they could do that," I explained to them. I could hear how shaky my voice was. Mr. Morgan frowned. "They usually can't do that. Must have been spooked by something. We'll call the vet first thing in the morning." He paused and looked at me. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem pretty shaken up." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just wasn't expecting to see that." They paid me extra that night. I wasn't really expecting that after what happened. Hazard pay, Mrs. Morgan called it with a nervous laugh. As I drove home, I kept checking my mirrors. I was on edge, very creeped out. I thought I would see something following me home, but I didn't. I should have told them that I couldn't babysit anymore. Made up an excuse of some kind. But the Morgans were good family friends, and besides, I didn't really have a good excuse yet. Beyond, a deer scared me so bad I don't want to be here. Sounds goofy, doesn't it? 2 weeks after that, when Mrs. Morgan called asking if I could watch Ellie on Saturday night, I said yes. I thought I'd be more careful. I would keep the dogs on leashes in the backyard instead. I'd stay highly alert. I wouldn't let what happened with Moose happen again. His paw, thankfully, had healed up quite nicely, though he still seemed nervous around the back door. That Saturday, I arrived at about 6. Ellie greeted me with her usual quiet smile, holding up her favorite stuffed rabbit. The Morgans went over the same routine again. Ellie's bedtime at 7:30, dogs out every 2 hours. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. The safe, normal routine. Except it didn't feel normal anymore. Ellie went down without a fuss, and at 8 p.m. I steeled myself to take the dogs out. I kept them both on short leashes, staying close to the porch. The sun had just set, and the sky was all purple and blue. The woods were very dark. We'd been outside for maybe 3 minutes, only 3 minutes, when I heard it again. The howl, and once more it was closer, maybe only 30 yards from the trees. It was answered by another howl, this time from a different direction. This one was to the left, near the corner of the fence. Moose started whining, pulling hard toward the house. Sadie's body tensed up, and she was ready to run. But she wasn't looking at the woods. She was staring at something in the yard itself. I looked to where she was looking, and I felt my stomach sink. There at the far end of the lawn near the fence stood a deer. Even in the faint light from the porch, I could tell it was the same buck from before. It was huge, with a rack that had to be at least 12 points. It was standing still, watching us. Deer freeze up when they're startled. They run when they're scared. They don't stand there and size you up as if you are the prey. "Let's go inside," I whispered, backing towards the door. "Come on." But as I watched the buck, it began to open its mouth. I might have been suburban raised, but I knew what sounds deer make. Grunts, bleats, that snort-wheeze sound during rut. But what came out of this deer's mouth was none of those things. It was that exact same howl that I'd been hearing, rising from deep within its chest, impossibly loud, like the sound a wolf might make, a wolf possessed by some sort of demon, that is. As it howled, 2 more deer seemed to emerge from the dark on either side of it. Had they been there the whole time? If they had, I had not seen them until that point, and the way they moved was not like deer. They sort of prowled like big cats, and when they opened their mouths, they howled too. I didn't remember opening the door or getting the dogs inside. One moment we were on the porch, frozen in terror, and the next we were in the house, panting, the door locked behind us and my heart going crazy. The howling went on for another 5 minutes. I sat with my back against the door, both dogs pressed against me, and all of us were shaking like leaves. When the howling finally stopped, even the silence wasn't a relief. At 10 p.m., the dogs had to go out again. I stood by the back door for a full 10 minutes trying to work up the courage before going out. Finally, I did something I'd never done before. I opened up the door just wide enough for them to squeeze out, then immediately closed and locked it behind them. I watched through the window, my phone ready to call 911 if needed. But for what? A deer attack? The dogs did their business in record time, both of them staying within 5 feet of the door. When I let them back in, they practically bowled me over in their rush to get back inside. When the Morgans came home at 11:30, I was sitting on the couch, wide awake. Every light in the house was on except for Ellie's. "Sarah, is everything okay?" Mrs. Morgan asked. I'd had an hour and a half to think about what I would say. I started with, "Do you guys ever hear anything weird from those woods at night? Like howls?" Mr. Morgan shook his head. "No, nothing like that. Why?" I came clean. "I keep hearing them out here. It started a few weeks back, and it's been getting closer, I swear." Mrs. Morgan sat down next to me. "Sarah, are you sure? We're here most nights and we've never heard anything unusual. Could it be coyotes?" "I know what coyotes sound like," I said. "Probably a bit more sharp than I should have. This sounds different. Tonight I saw 3 deer in your backyard and they were making those sounds." They looked at each other. I could tell they thought I was losing it. To their credit, I probably was. "Deer can't howl like that, sweetheart," Mr. Morgan said. "They're physically not capable of doing it." I wanted to say something and insist on what I'd seen and heard, but what was even the point? They weren't here when it happened. They didn't hear it. And trying to convince someone that their backyard was being stalked by predatory deer would only make me sound psychotic. "I guess I'm just tired," I said finally. "It's been a long week." It was a lie. I knew what I saw, and I knew I would probably have to come back at some point. Because that's the thing about the Morgans. They're family, and you don't abandon family even when every cell in your body is screaming at you to run. The next time Mrs. Morgan called, 3 days later, I almost didn't pick up. But I told myself I had to, so I did, and I said yes. This time I came prepared. I downloaded every article I could find about deer behavior, aggressive wildlife, anything that could explain what I'd been seeing and hearing. The scientific part of my brain insisted there had to be a rational explanation. Rabies, maybe, wasting disease, some sickness that made them act this way. But diseases don't make animals coordinate, don't make them hunt in packs. Ellie, this time, was already in bed when I arrived. She'd been very tired, Mrs. Morgan explained, and they'd put her down early. The dogs greeted me with their usual enthusiasm, though I noticed both of them seemed reluctant to go near the back door. The Morgans left at 7, and I was alone in the house with 2 sleeping creatures and whatever was waiting in the woods. I made it until 9:30, before the dogs had to go out. I'd been putting it off, checking the backyard obsessively through the windows, seeing nothing but shadows and trees. Finally, Moose started to whine and paw at the door. I knew even he could not wait any longer. This time I went out with them. That time I'd let them out alone, I'd felt guilty about. I didn't want them to get hurt or not see it coming. Again, I kept them both on short leashes, staying under the porch light, and I had my phone in my pocket, with 911 already dialed. For a few minutes, everything was quiet. The dogs did their business and the woods stayed dark and relievingly still. I started to relax, feeling foolish for being so paranoid. Then Sadie's ears pricked up. She began to stare at the back fence, and her body went stiff. Like before, I followed where she was looking, and I found a shape darker than the surrounding shadows. But this was on the other side of the fence, the 8-foot-tall fence. Something that tall, that large, could not be a dog or coyote or even a deer. The howl started low, almost subsonic. I swear I felt it in my chest before I heard it in my ears. It rose and rose until it seemed to fill the entire world, bouncing off the house and the trees and the fence, coming from everywhere at once. And then the call was answered. Not from the woods or inside the fence. I spun around and there it was. The massive buck was standing between us and the house. That was impossible. How could something that big have slipped past us? Dogs have extraordinary noses and ears, and even both of them had been taken off guard. I never heard it jump the fence, never heard it walk or breathe. In the porch light, I could see it so clearly for the first time. That fur around its mouth stained dark with something that likely wasn't dirt or mud. The way its jaw hung slightly open, revealing teeth that were sharp. The eyes that caught the light wrong, turning it dead and flat. It then took a step forward, then another. Moose was barking frantically. Sadie had gone completely silent, frozen in place. My hand moved without conscious thought, hurling my phone at the creature, the only thing I had to defend myself. It bounced off its shoulder, but the thing didn't even flinch. "Get back!" I screamed, grabbing a lawn chair and holding it in front of me like a lion tamer. "Get back!" For a minute, we stood there in a horrible staring contest. Me, the dogs, and that thing that could not be a deer. Then, slowly, it began to back away toward the fence. But it didn't turn around, and it didn't break eye contact. It just backed up until it reached the fence, turned a tad sideways, and jumped over. 8 feet straight up, smooth as water, barely even trying. Once it was gone, I grabbed both dogs and ran for the house. In seconds, we were all piled on the kitchen floor, happy to be alive. I rose up and stared at the back door, hoping that something wasn't about to try to break through. And luckily, nothing did. When the Morgans came home at 11, they found every door and window in the house locked, every curtain drawn, and once again, every light except Ellie's on. I told them straight out I could not babysit for them anymore. I didn't explain a reason, I just said I couldn't come back after this. Mrs. Morgan tried to press me. She wanted to know if something had happened, but I shook my head, thanked them, and left. There was no use explaining anything to them. Obviously, they weren't seeing or hearing any of this. It was just me. Why me? They did call me twice after that, asking if I'd reconsider. I told them no. I couldn't go back there, not to that house. To this day, I wonder what in the world was up with those deer. Was it all in my head? Were these aggressive, territorial deer? Or were they hunting me and the dogs? The Fridge. From Snippet. At one time, my husband was a maintenance worker for the city we live in. He would work in the streets cleaning up after homeless camps and clearing branches and debris when the weather got crazy. Usually it wasn't dangerous, and he liked that he wasn't stuck in an office all day. From his 3 years working there, he says the majority of injuries were from throwing out your back from improper lifting. You would have to occasionally keep an eye out for uncapped needles and bed bugs, maybe a rat or roach. Usually the homeless would just move along, leaving them to clean in peace. But he also has some pretty crazy stories, and he has allowed me to share this one. Thankfully, no one was injured in this story, but I have to imagine that, in the moment, this was quite terrifying. Seeing a lot of people lose their livelihoods due to addiction or economic pressures only makes you feel so bad until you see how feral a human can turn when left out in the wild. Some people might leave needles everywhere, their excrement and trash smeared everywhere. The maintenance crew even had a saying for when a trash bag broke on you and dripped onto your clothes: getting juiced. One hot summer day, they had reached a popular alley where homeless people liked to camp out. When they cleaned this alley, they usually had a marshal as backup down the alley to make sure there were no issues with the cleanup. Many people recognized the city trucks and started to clear away as the crew set up for the day. My husband said it was really sad that every week or so they cleaned the alley, and it only took a day for the people from these camps to come back and revert it back to an absolute dump. This was a continuous process that only put a band-aid on a bigger issue. This week, by some miracle, some guy had managed to travel with a full-size fridge, containing what everyone suspected was his clothes and some other items. My husband's crew supervisor explained to the man that either he moved the fridge or they would have to toss it away. The supervisor was not getting anywhere with the man about this fridge. The crew decided to take a lunch break and give the man some time to figure out what he wanted to do. The man paced back and forth, probably on something that made him move erratically. A while later, the crew's supervisor tried again to let the man know they were going to have to take the fridge to the dump since he could not move it. My husband watched from the cleaning truck as the man became belligerent, shouting and cursing and stomping about, saying that they were not allowed to touch his personal items. The supervisor tried to explain that if he could move it, there would be no issue, but this alley was city property, and he could not technically store his belongings here. As the man started getting more aggressive, the supervisor backed off and called the local marshals for backup. At this point, no one thought it was anything more than a crazy man trying to hang on to the last of what he could. My husband said it was a mixture of sadness and frustration as they waited in the truck for backup to arrive, while the man began throwing trash and yelling obscenities. Now they couldn't continue their work at all for fear of the man launching mystery bags at them. When the marshals arrived, one got down to speak to the man, and the other one in the car got down to inspect the inside of the fridge. As soon as the man saw this, he bolted away. The marshal called for backup to catch him further down the alley, and joined his partner to investigate this fridge. This is when my husband says the marshal at the fridge yelled at his partner to stand back, and said something that he couldn't quite understand. But he says you could see the panic on both their faces. The marshal who had opened the fridge stood there holding the door, looking petrified. The supervisor tried walking over to see what was going on, and the marshal, calling in backup, yelled at him to stay put. As the marshal came over to speak with him, the maintenance workers heard his radio crackle to confirm that the bomb squad had been called in and were on their way. Chaos among the maintenance workers ensued, most of them still hanging outside the trucks, started piling into them. The supervisor was told that they could move their vehicles to a safer distance, but the whole area had to be contained. Panic set in as the maintenance vehicles sat idly by, waiting to see if this bomb would go off. Many coworkers started calling their families to speak to them one last time, in case the bomb squad couldn't get there in time. This alley was no more than 2 cars wide and stretched for about a mile. There was no easy way in or out. The bomb squad arrived a couple of moments later. My husband said he felt every second move slower than the last as he watched them hover over the fridge. Then he watched as they backed away about 10 feet from the ticking time bomb, and he heard a popping sound. The bomb squad then pulled out the contraption inside the fridge and finished dismantling it. They were given the all clear and had to return to cleaning the alley. Everyone was way more on edge, but relieved that they wouldn't be turned into more gunk on the sides of the alley. They did end up catching the man a street down and brought him in. A couple of weeks later, on another cleanup, my husband asked the marshal about him. The marshal said it was a homemade bomb, but it didn't seem like the man knew what he was doing, which made the device extremely unpredictable. The man was arrested and hasn't been seen around the cleanup since then. My husband didn't stay in that department much longer and has not encountered another bomb fridge since. Lunch Demon, from Everybody Grandma. My niece is getting married pretty soon, and she asked me to help with the catering. She's doing it at her fiancé's family's farm, with about 80 people total. I told her I'd handle the mashed potatoes and gravy because I can do that in my sleep at this point. And she laughed, saying, "Aunt Barb, you've been feeding kids slop for 20 years. I think you can handle real food." I didn't take offense. She's not wrong about the slop part, honestly. But here's the thing. When she asked me, my first thought wasn't about the food or the logistics or any of that. My first thought was, thank God it's not at the school. You see, I need to get this out somewhere. I almost told my sister about it last Christmas, after I'd had too much wine, but I chickened out. She would have thought I lost my mind. I think I've told my husband most of it over the years, but not all of it. And I'd like to keep it that way because he worries enough about me as it is. What with my blood pressure and my knees and everything else that starts falling apart once you've hit your mid-40s. I work in food service at an elementary school. The building is very old. Very, very old. As in, you can tell they've painted over the same walls about 15 times. And there's that specific smell that old schools have, like chalk dust and maybe floor wax, and another smell underneath that you can't quite name. The cafeteria is downstairs, partly underground with those sad little windows up by the ceiling that let in a bit of light, but not much. I remember my first day, walking down those stairs, thinking about how it feels like a basement that someone tried to dress up as a lunchroom, which is basically what it is. Now, I grew up Catholic. Not that I go to Mass every Sunday anymore, but it's still in there, you know? My mom had holy water in a little font by our front door, and we blessed ourselves going in and going out. I got confirmed, did the whole thing. I believe in God, and that means I believe in the other side too. The enemy, or whatever you want to call it. I just never thought I'd have any personal experiences with that side. That was for movies and stories and those people on TV who are probably making half of it up anyway. But I don't think I'm making this up, even though I really wish I was. The school kitchen is attached to the cafeteria, obviously. Behind the kitchen there's storage access and a walk-in cooler. And then there's this big supply closet. When I say big, I mean real big, like at least 30 feet deep. Shelves going way back into the dark because there's only one light. This single bulb on a pole chain right when you walk in. So the front part is lit okay, but the further back you go, the darker it gets. We keep stuff we don't use much back there. Big institutional cans of things, extra trays, holiday decorations for the kids. For years, I never thought twice about going back there, You just grab what you need, you get out, and you're done. The woman who trained me when I first started was named Dolores. She's retired now, moved to Florida to be near her grandkids. But I remember one thing she told me that I didn't quite understand at the time. She said, "Barb, if you ever feel like something's not right back there, just leave. You can get what you need later, or send someone else." I tried to ask more about it, but she kind of waved her hand and said, "You'll know if it happens." I thought she was being dramatic. After all, Dolores could be dramatic. Okay, so the first thing I need to tell you about is Lupe. Guadalupe, but everyone calls her Lupe. She's been working there longer than me. She's maybe 60 now, a little Mexican lady who barely comes up to my shoulder, but she works harder than anyone I've ever met. She never complains even when her feet are killing her. She does a lot of the soup and stock work because she's really good at it, and she seems to enjoy it, which is more than I can say for the rest of us when it comes to stirring giant pots for hours. We've got these tilting kettles for making stock and soup in big batches. The big ones that hold about 40 gallons, if I recall. There's a wheel on the side you crank to tilt it for pouring. You have to be careful with them because 40 gallons of boiling liquid can do a lot of damage if something goes wrong. Last March, Lupe was working one of the kettles, chicken stock. I remember because the smell was really nice that day. She always made it better than the recipe called for. I was at the prep station cutting carrots or celery or something. I don't remember that part, but I do know that I was about 15 feet away from her. She had just stepped back from the kettle to grab a towel off the counter, just a few steps back. And that's when the wheel started turning by itself. I saw it. I was looking right at it. Nobody was touching that thing. And it started to turn, and the kettle started tipping, and all that boiling stock began to pour out onto the floor right where Lupe had been standing only seconds ago. She screamed, I screamed, the stock went everywhere, splashing, steam coming up off the floor, and Lupe slipped, trying to get away from it. She went down hard, and some of it got on her leg. She was out for almost a month with those burns. But here's the thing. If she hadn't stepped back right when she did, if she'd been standing where she was, that stock would have poured directly onto her, her whole body. And people can die from burns like that. I looked it up later. The maintenance guy said the locking mechanism probably failed. Said the vibration from the walk-in cooler might have caused the wheel to turn. I just nodded and said, yeah, that must have been it. Not sure what else I was supposed to say. Lupe came back to work eventually, but she wouldn't go near those kettles anymore. Someone else took over the stock duty, and nobody really talked about what happened. But I saw her face when she came back that first day. She looked at that kettle like it was a person who had tried to harm her. Now on to the second thing. We have 6 big commercial ovens along the back wall of the kitchen. Old, but they work fine. We get them serviced regularly. I'm always the one who checks the knobs after lunch service, and I check every single one. Make sure they're all off. It's just something I do, probably borderline OCD about it, honestly. So we're cleaning up after lunch, and I start to smell smoke. Not like the typical burnt cheese or whatever, but actual smoke. I look over, and there's gray smoke coming out of oven number 3. I'd checked that knob maybe 20 minutes earlier. It was off, and I know it was off. I yelled for everyone to get back, and I grabbed the fire extinguisher. When I opened the oven door, smoke poured out, and inside there were actual flames. Something was burning in there. When everything cooled down and we looked inside, there was a kitchen towel. Almost completely burned up, but you could tell what it was. Nobody had put a towel in that oven. I asked everyone. And why would they even do that? Even if somehow a towel got in there by accident, the oven was off. Again, I checked it. The knob was in the off position when I opened that door. Towels don't walk into ovens and catch fire by themselves when the oven isn't even on. One of the other women, her name's Patrice, has worked there as long as me. After everyone else went home that day, I asked her straight up, I said, "Patrice, what do you think is going on in this kitchen?" She said that her grandmother down in Louisiana used to talk about bad spirits. She said that some places just end up with them, and you can't always make them leave. You just have to live with them and hope they don't decide to get serious. I then asked if that's what she thought we had here. She said she didn't know what else to call it. Okay, now on to the supply closet. Remember I said there's only one light and the back part is dark? I'd been feeling weird about going back there for a while. That feeling like someone's watching you. I'd tell myself I was being stupid and go anyway, because I needed kidney beans or whatever, and I wasn't going to let my imagination run my life. One morning I went back for something. I was maybe halfway to the back shelves, and I looked up into the dark part, and I saw these two little points of light. My brain said it's just something reflective. Probably metal on a can or something catching the light from the bulb. That made sense to me. I kept walking toward it because I'd already explained it away. What's so scary about some reflection? I got maybe another 5 feet, and those two little lights blinked. Blinked like eyes closing and opening. Oh, I left in a hurry. I didn't get whatever I went back there for. I made myself go back later with Patrice, and there was nothing there. Just shelves and cans and boxes. I've seen those eyes 2 more times since then. Once when I was putting away Christmas decorations after winter break. I looked up at a high shelf, and there they were, looking down at me. I knocked over a whole rack of trays getting out of there. The other time I was leaving for the day, and I turned off the light. And right before everything went dark, I saw them way in the back, just for a second, watching me. I don't know what it is. I'd rather not know. But just in case, I brought in a little bottle of holy water from church, and I keep it in my locker even now. But I have no idea if that does anything at all. But I do try not to be alone down there anymore. I make sure someone else is always around. The other women, we don't really talk about it directly, but there's sort of an understanding that it's best not to go to the storage closet alone. My niece's wedding is in April, and I'm actually looking forward to making those mashed potatoes. Real kitchen, real food, daylight. No walk-in cooler humming in the background and no storage closet with 1 light bulb and 30 feet of darkness behind it. I've got maybe 6 years until I can retire with full benefits. That's what keeps me going. 6 more years of early mornings in that basement kitchen, of checking oven knobs 3 times and staying out of the back of the supply closet, pretending I don't feel and sometimes see something watching me. Don't you worry about me, I'm gonna make it just fine. But whatever's down there knows I know. And I think it's fine with that for now. There is a serial killer on the loose. From Anonymous. I cannot tell you where I work or give real names. I know how that looks, like I'm making it up or covering my tracks. But if I'm right about what I think I saw, then the guy I'm about to describe is still out there, still working in that same office. And I'm still the guy who cleans that office 3 nights a week, alone, between midnight and sunrise. So no, I'm not going to put my name on this. So I do 3rd shift custodial work, ranging from commercial buildings to office parks. This was actually my backup job. I used to work at a plant my whole adult life, but it got shut down and everything moved to Mexico. I was 47 when that happened. You know how many people want to hire a 47-year-old man with a bad back and no college? Cleaning toilets at 3 a.m. was the best I could do. It's fine, I don't mind working alone, after 20-something years of factory noise and people everywhere. You know, the quiet is actually nice. The business park where this happened has maybe 6 buildings. Small ones, 2 floors each. They have insurance offices and accountants and chiropractors. Real boring stuff. I've had that contract for a few years now. You get to know the patterns. Who leaves their desk a mess, who works late, who leaves passive-aggressive notes about the bathroom soap. There's this one guy. I'll call him the consultant, because that's basically what his door says. Some vague business consulting thing. I've never understood what he actually does for a living. His office is always clean, it barely looks used. Just a desk and some chairs and those fake motivational posters that every office has. He works late a lot. Maybe 2-3 nights a week he'll still be there when I come through. Most people who are staying late and working still, they tend to ignore you. You're part of the building to them, same as the furniture. But this guy, the consultant, he's different. Every time he hears me in the hallway, he comes out and wants to chat. He asks about my night and my wife and my life, and he remembers details that I told him weeks back. I've been doing this work long enough to know that's not usual. The ones who go out of their way to buddy up to you, the guys who make sure you see them being friendly and normal, there's usually a reason they're doing that. 8 months ago, I found out what his reason might be. It was winter, stupid cold, around 2 a.m. I was working my way down the hall on the second floor, and his light was still on. The door opened just a crack. I could hear him talking, but the voice sounded off, muffled. I figured he was on a phone call, so I stopped outside with my cart, waiting to see if I could skip his office and come back later. But then I heard something that wasn't talking. I'm not sure how to describe it just right. It was a wet sound. A gasp that got cut off and turned into something else, then nothing. Then him moving around in there, footsteps, something heavy being shifted across the floor. The door swung open and he was right there. He looked at me. I looked at him. He had his sleeves pushed up and there was something dark on his forearms. Could have been anything in that light. Could have been coffee or maybe nothing. His face was the same as always, calm and friendly. He said something like, "Working late, you know how it is." He told me to give him 20 minutes and the office was mine. He closed the door then. I finished my round and I came back when he was gone. I let myself in with my key. The office looked the same as always except it smelled like cleaning products. Strongly, like a whole bottle of something had just been dumped out. The carpet behind his desk was wet. I stood there looking at it for a moment. Then I left and I finished my shift and drove home, still kind of thinking about what that interaction even was. Now, about a week later, there was a missing persons case on the local news. A woman in her early 30s. She had brown hair and she was last seen leaving a bar. I recognized her face, but I couldn't figure out from where. A month or so later, I saw him leaving late with a duffel bag, a big one. He was carrying it real careful with one hand underneath, like whatever was in there was heavy. He saw me watching from down the hall. He smiled and said something about donating old clothes. That night I called in, an anonymous tip. Told them something was wrong with this guy. Gave them the address, described what I'd heard and seen. The person on the phone sounded like she was filling out a form and waiting for me to stop talking. Nothing came of it. Another woman went missing a few weeks later. A different part of town, but same general type. 30s, lived alone, went out at night and never came back. I called again and got the same result. I actually went to the station eventually. I talked to someone who said they'd looked into it after my first call, and that there was nothing there. The guy had no record and ran a normal business with no complaints. The detective told me sometimes people hear things late at night and their minds fill in details that aren't there. I went back to work. Not too long ago, they found a body in a pond not far from the business park. Woman, mid-30s, strangled. It was on the news for about 2 days. I don't know if she was one of the missing women from before or someone new. The police haven't released much information just yet. This man, he still works late. He still comes out to talk to me when he hears my cart in the hallway. He still smiles and asks how I'm doing. I keep thinking about how easy it would be. The building is empty at that hour, nobody around, just me and him and whatever's behind that door. I can't quit. I'm 54 with a bad back and a wife whose medication costs more than our mortgage payment, and it's getting more expensive every year. This job has insurance. I can't just walk away from that. So I show up and I empty his trash and I vacuum his carpet. I smile right back at him when he smiles at me. And I guess all I can do is wait for the next body to turn up. Maybe when they find enough of them, someone will finally listen. Or maybe they won't. Maybe I'll keep cleaning his office until I retire or die, whichever comes first. And he'll keep doing whatever he does, and nobody will ever connect the dots. I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe because if something happens to me, or if they finally catch him, someone will know that the janitor tried. That I saw something and I said something and nobody cared. The Stranger. From Panama Guy 776. My brother-in-law keeps asking me why I won't take solo calls anymore. He thinks I'm being lazy or trying to stick him with the overnight and weekend stuff now that he's bought into the business. I told him it's an insurance liability thing, which isn't totally a lie, but it's not the real answer. Now, I've been doing this plumbing work going on 15 years. I started as an apprentice right out of high school because college wasn't for me and my dad knew a guy. I worked my way up, got my license. Eventually, I went in on a small operation with my brother-in-law about 5 years back. We do okay. Residential mostly. Some light commercial. The territory covers a pretty wide stretch of rural Illinois, which means a lot of windshield time between jobs. And that means a lot of podcasts, hint hint, audiobooks, whatever. Good thinking time. This particular call came in on a Thursday afternoon from a realtor, a woman named Pam or Patty. Can't remember exactly, but I'd have to check the invoice. She had a vacant property about 40 minutes outside of town. It was listed for sale, and apparently every single person who came to look at it complained about a leak in the main bathroom. A shower head dripping, she said. Not a big deal usually, but enough that buyers kept mentioning it, and she wanted it handled before the next showing that weekend. A vacant house, a simple fix, should take maybe an hour tops. She let me know that the garage door would be open, and I could let myself in through there. Just close everything up when I'm done, using the panel on the outside of the garage. She'd leave a check on the kitchen counter for me. I told her I could get out there Friday evening after my last scheduled job, and she said that was fine. The house was way out there, I mean way out. Some of you might know how rural Illinois gets once you're off the main roads. Corn and soybeans and occasional clusters of trees breaking up the horizon. This place was down a gravel road, about 2 miles from the nearest paved surface. It was 6:30 p.m. when I pulled up. Looks like they had neighbors about a half-mile away at the closest, but too many tree lines to see them. The sun was getting low, but there was still plenty of light. The house was actually nice. 2 stories, probably built in the 90s, vinyl siding, decent-sized lot. A little overgrown, but not bad for a vacant property. And the garage door was open just like she said. I grabbed my bag and walked in through the garage. That's when I noticed the entry door, the one that goes from the garage into the house, was also open already. Not just unlocked, but standing wide open. That gave me a little pause. Could have been the realtor forgot to close it all the way. Could have been wind pushed it open if the latch didn't catch. Old houses can do weird things, so I pushed it open the rest of the way and called out. "Hello? Anyone in here? It's the plumber." No response. I walked through a little mudroom into the kitchen. The check was on the counter like she said. Dated, signed, the amount was right. Everything looked normal. The cabinets were empty and the counters were clean. It had the echoiness of an empty house. I called out again. "Hello?" Still no response. I shrugged and went to find the bathroom. The main floor bathroom was off a hallway past the living room. Decently sized, needed updating, but not terrible. I could see the issue right away. The shower head was dripping steady, and it was not just an occasional drop, but a thin stream. It probably needed a new washer or maybe a cartridge replacement. An easy fix. I set my bag down and I got to work. Now here's the thing about empty houses. They can make noise. You'll often hear settling pipes and wind outside, animals in the walls or attics sometimes. I know this. I've worked in hundreds of empty houses, and I don't get jumpy about normal sounds. The sounds I started to hear were not normal sounds. About 10 minutes into the job, I heard something from upstairs. A creak, then another, like footsteps, but not all the way. So it made me think the house was settling. Sure, that sounded right. I stopped what I was doing and just listened. There was nothing else, so I went back to work. A few minutes later, there was movement in my peripheral vision. Out in the hallway, just past the bathroom door, I turned my head and there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway and the living room beyond it. I'm not a nervous person. You can ask anybody who knows me. But something about that movement bothered me a bit. It didn't feel like a shadow shifting or light changing. It felt like something pulling back. Like something had been there and moved away right as I turned to look. I put down my wrench and walked out into the hallway. I looked both directions. Then I went to the living room, checked the kitchen, even opened a couple closet doors. Empty. Nobody there. I stood in the living room for another 30 seconds, just listening. The house was quiet except for that dripping, which I could still hear from the bathroom. Get it together, I thought. Then I went back to work. I was almost done. I had the shower head off and was replacing the cartridge when I saw it again. Movement past the doorway. But this time I didn't just catch it in my peripheral vision. This time I saw it directly. A shape, a person, moving from the hallway toward the stairs. I dropped what I was holding and called out, "Hey!" I didn't get a response, but I did hear footsteps, definitely footsteps, going up the stairs. Not fast, not running, but walking, like whoever it was did not care that I'd seen them. I should have left right then, grabbed my crap and left out the door, calling the cops from my truck. That's what a smart person would have done. But instead, I followed. Honestly, I don't know why. At the time, I was thinking this was some squatter who didn't know anyone was coming. Someone I could just tell to clear out while I was there. Maybe I thought it was a teenager messing around in some empty house. My mind was trying to make sense of it. The stairs went up to a landing and then turned. I went up slow, one hand on the railing. The light was different up there, much dimmer. The sun had gone down more than I realized while I was working, and the upstairs hallway was full of shadows. "Hello? Someone up here?" Nothing. There were maybe 4 doors off the hallway, all of them open. Bedrooms, a bathroom, what looked to be an old home office. At the end of the hall was a larger room with a big window. One of those bay window setups with a bench seat built in. The window faced east, and the moon was up, nearly full, casting light into the room. I walked toward it. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find. Maybe to look out the window and see someone running across the yard. Maybe to find an open window where somebody had climbed out. But I was not expecting what I actually found. The room was empty except for the built-in bench and some curtains that had been left behind. The moonlight came through the window bright enough that I could see pretty clearly. And there, against the wall to my left, maybe 6 feet away from me, someone was standing. They were pressed flat against the wall, arms down to their sides, completely still. They were in the shadow just outside where the moonlight hit directly. I think they thought they were hidden from view. That's what gets me the most. They were standing there like a kid playing hide and seek, like if they just stayed still enough, I wouldn't see them. But the moon was bright, and my eyes had adjusted, and I could see them just fine. The outline of a person. Head, shoulders, arms, legs, just standing there against the wall, not moving, not breathing as far as I could tell. I couldn't see their face. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. I couldn't tell anything about them except that they were there and that they'd been watching me. They'd been in this house with me the whole time I'd been working downstairs. My whole body wanted to run. My muscles were screaming at me to start running. But something else kicked in. Some instinct I didn't know I had. And whatever it was, it told me that if I ran right now, they would know that I'd seen them. And I did not want to know what they'd do in response to that. Would they chase me? Were there more of them somewhere in the house? I didn't know anything except that I needed to not be there anymore. So I pretended. I made myself look toward the window like I was checking if it was locked. I walked over to it, casual as I could manage, and I looked out at the yard for a second. Then I turned and walked back toward the hallway. I did not look directly at the wall. I didn't look in their direction at all. I walked down the stairs at a normal pace, but my hands were trembling. I got to the bottom of the stairs and turned toward the bathroom. Then I ran, grabbing my bag, not bothering to zip it. Pretty sure I dropped some stuff as I went through the kitchen and into the garage. I hit the button on the outside panel, and the garage door started coming down, but I didn't wait to make sure it went all the way. I was in my truck with the engine running before it was halfway closed. I drove about a mile down that gravel road before I pulled over because I had to catch my breath. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes just breathing. Then I called the realtor. She didn't answer though, so I left a voicemail along the lines of, "There's someone in the house. You need to call the police. There was someone hiding upstairs. I saw them." I was still pretty shook, so I'm not sure exactly what I said. She called me back about an hour later. She said the police had gone out and checked the property, but found nobody. All the doors and windows seemed to be secure. No signs of forced entry or anyone being there. She asked if maybe I'd seen a shadow or a coat hanging somewhere that looked like a person in the dark. I said, yeah, maybe, that was probably it, but it wasn't. I know what I saw. There was someone in that house, someone watching me work and would run upstairs to hide again if I looked. A person, a stranger, who stood 6 feet away in the dark, hoping that I didn't see them. But when the cops came, they were gone. I still think about what would have happened if I'd reacted differently. What if I'd yelled or confronted them, or tried to run right away? Think about the type of individuals who might hide in empty houses in the middle of nowhere and watch strangers work. What kind of person would that be? And would it be the kind of person you really want to confront? So, moral of the story is my brother-in-law can think whatever he wants. Can you tell me what this was? From Peter. My English is not perfect, so excuse me if some of this reads strangely. I had a friend check the grammar, but some things I could not translate exactly how I wanted to say them. I work for a company that maintains electrical infrastructure in rural areas. I won't say which country because I don't want problems with my employer, just in case. Somewhere in Central Europe is enough for you to know. The area where this happened is mostly forest and farmland, with small villages spread far apart. Some of these villages have maybe 200 people, some even less. In winter you can drive for an hour and see nobody else on the roads. This was last November. We had storms that knocked down trees and damaged lines in several places. I was sent alone to check a section of line that runs through forest about 40 kilometers from the nearest town of any real size. The job was just to drive the access road along the line, checking for damage, and to mark anything that needed repair crews. The road, however, was not paved. It was just gravel and dirt, wide enough for just one vehicle. The power company maintains it, but only just. In autumn, with the rain, it becomes mud in places. You need the right vehicle or you'll get stuck. I'd started early in the morning and worked my way along the line for several hours. By afternoon, I was deep into the forest, maybe 15 kilometers from the nearest village. The sky was heavy with clouds, and it was getting dark earlier than usual. I decided to check one more section, then I would head back. I stopped the truck near pole number 247, because I could see from the road that something had struck it. Not fallen completely, but it was leaning now. I got out to take photographs and notes for the repair crew. Around then, I heard something moving in the trees. I guessed it was deer. We have tons of deer in these forests, and they move through the underbrush constantly. But this sounded a bit different, a lot heavier than what I was used to hearing with deer. And it was coming toward me, not running away like deer do when they hear a vehicle. I stopped, and I listened. The sound kept coming. Slow steps breaking sticks on the ground. Something large was pushing through. I could not see anything yet, because the forest was thick in that area, and the light was already dim. To be truthful, I'm not someone who frightens easily. I've worked in these forests for 11 years. I've encountered things like wild hogs, wolves, even a bear once about 6 years back. You learn to be calm and to assess the situation, to know where the real danger is, and when there is no danger. But this felt like danger, so I moved back toward my truck. I thought I would get inside and wait for whatever animal this was to pass, but the sound then changed direction. It was moving to cut me off from the truck. So that's when I decided to hide instead of run. There's this maintenance shed about 20 meters from where I was standing. A small metal structure, about 3 meters by 3 meters. It was where we keep some equipment and supplies. The door had a padlock, but luckily, I had a key. I went to it as quickly and quietly as I could, unlocked it, went inside, and pulled the door closed behind me. This shed had no windows, just metal walls and a metal door with gaps at the bottom and around the frame where light comes through. I stood in the dark in that little building, and I listened closely. For maybe 2 or 3 minutes, it was silent. I was hoping then I'd overreacted. It was just a boar or a deer, and my mind had made it into something worse. But then the footsteps came. They came right up to the shed. These did not sound like animal footsteps. It wasn't 4 legs, but 2 that I heard. Heavy legs that circled the shed very slowly. Was this a person? I thought. Why were they here? Why were they doing this to me? I wondered. I held my breath. Through the gap at the bottom of the door, I could see the thing's shadow moving. Something was definitely walking around the shed. It would pause on occasion, then start walking again. I pressed myself against the back wall and waited. I watched as the shadows of the footsteps stopped at the door. I could hear it breathing then, right on the other side, deep and slow. Something was standing right there, only centimeters from where I was hiding, separated by only a thin metal door. I looked through the gap, carefully. I saw 2 legs, but they were not human. They were covered in dark fur or hair. I couldn't tell which, but that was no person. They were so long and thin, and there was something wrong with the knees, like they were broken. The feet were large and ended in claws, not toes. I didn't move, and I tried not to breathe. I stood there watching those legs through the gap at the bottom of the door, and I prayed to God that the lock would hold if it tried to get in. It stayed at the door for a very long time. Really, it might have been just a couple minutes, but time does weird things in such moments. I could hear it sniffing out there. Reminded me of a dog, like when a dog tracks something. It knew I was in there, it had to. The shed smelled like me. like my cigarettes, like the coffee I'd spilled on my jacket that morning. But the door didn't open. The thing outside made a sound low and guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard an animal make. But then the legs moved away from the gap. I heard footsteps again, circling one more time, then moving off into the forest. But you know what's funny? I didn't leave that shed. Not yet. In fact, I stayed in that shed for over an hour. I stayed motionless, listening for any sound that might tell me it had come back, or that it was merely hiding a few meters away. But there was nothing. I could hear the wind in the trees and the distant sound of crows, but that was it. When I finally opened the door, the forest was almost completely dark. I walked to my truck with my keys already in hand. I didn't look around. I didn't stop. I was too scared to do that. I got in, started the engine, and drove. The access road connects to a larger rural road that eventually reaches the main highway. I drove faster than I probably should have on that gravel, not caring if I damaged the truck. I just wanted to reach the paved road where there would be other vehicles, other people, lights. I was about 5 kilometers from the junction when I saw it again. It was standing at the edge of the road, just where the trees meet the gravel. In my headlights, I could see it clearly for the first time. Bear with me now, even if it sounds crazy. It stood on 2 legs like a man, very tall, maybe 2 meters or more. The limbs were long and thin, like I said before about the legs. The body was lean though, almost starved looking. Have you ever seen how a bear looks when it has not eaten for a long time, and the bones show through the fur? It was like that, a scrawny frame with visible ribs and spine, even through the fur that covered it. But that head did not look like a bear's. The face was narrow and long, with a snout like a wolf's. The ears were pointed and stood up from the top of the skull. The eyes caught my headlights and reflected back yellow. It was crouched over something on the ground. A deer, I believe, a young one. And it was eating. When my headlights hit it, the thing shot its head up to look at me. Its face was dark and wet with blood. The fur around its mouth and down its chest was matted with fresh blood from the deer it had just killed. It didn't run. It didn't seem bothered with me. It just looked at me as I drove past, continuing to chew. God, I could see pieces of meat hanging from its jaws. Its eyes followed my truck until I was past it, and then I saw it in my mirror, crouching there watching me go. I drove and drove and drove until I made it to a petrol station, one with bright lights and other cars in the lot. I went inside, got coffee and a snack. It helped calm me down, but this wasn't something I'd soon forget. That deer is what I kept seeing in my mind. The poor creature it had just killed and was eating when I drove past. A fresh kill still bleeding. That meant when it was circling the shed with me in it, sniffing at the door, trying to find a way in to where I was hiding, it had not yet eaten. It was hungry. I know what people will say. A bear, some sick one that had just lost its fur in patches, even a wolf that somehow looked larger in the dark. They would tell me my imagination filled in details that were not there. By now I've heard all these explanations, even in my own head. But I know what I saw. It was no wolf and no bear. It was no animal that should exist in these forests or anywhere else. I've seen pictures and drawings of what people call werewolves. In movies, in old books, and artwork. I'm not saying I believe in such things. I'm not a superstitious person. I go to church at Easter and Christmas, like most people here. And that's the extent of my religious thinking. I don't believe in monsters or legends or fairy tales. But if someone asked me to describe what I saw that night, the only word that fits is werewolf. But I need you to know before I end this story, I don't call it a werewolf because I think it's a man who transforms under the full moon. No, it's because that's what it looked like. A thing that was somehow both wolf and not wolf. Animal and not animal. It walked on two legs, hunted in the forest, and knew enough to circle a shed, looking for a way inside. Warning. The following story contains depictions of violence against pets. My experiences as a groundskeeper. From Not Your Willie. You ever wonder who works at graveyards? Well, that would be me. Last month, they hired a new kid to help me with the summer maintenance. He's a college boy, maybe 19 or 20, and he needed some work between semesters. On his third day, I found him eating his lunch in the northeast corner, sitting on one of the old limestone markers, like it was a bench at a park. No, I didn't yell at him because it wasn't his fault. Nobody had explained anything to him yet. I just walked over and told him he should come eat by the shack instead. He asked why, of course, and I told him it was just better that way. He looked at me like I was a superstitious old man. He's not really wrong there. But he packed up his sandwich and came with me. He didn't ask any more questions after that, which I thought showed some intelligence on his behalf. I think he'd already noticed by then that none of the other workers spent any time back in that corner, if they could help it. He'd probably noticed that we mow that section as fast as we can, then we leave. He might have even noticed that we don't schedule burials in the plots along the back fences, even though there's still space available, and families sometimes request them. You learn things when you work at a place like this for a long time. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds up real slow over the years. A little piece here, another piece there, and eventually you realize that there's this whole collection of knowledge that nobody ever discusses out loud, but everyone seems to note. I've been the head groundskeeper at this cemetery since 1987. Before that, I worked under a man named Harold Fitch for about 5 years, while he trained me to take over when he retired. Harold had worked here since the early 60s, and the man before him went back to just after the Second World War. There's a continuity to a job like this that you don't get in most places. Things get passed down. The northeast section is the oldest part of the grounds. The stones back there date to the 1840s, when this area was mostly just farms and a small church with a burial ground beside it. Most of those old markers are rough-cut limestone from local quarries, and they've weathered so badly over the years that you can't read most of the names anymore. Some of the plots don't even have visible markers now. You can only tell where they are by the shallow depressions in the ground where the earth settled after the wooden coffins rotted and collapsed underneath. I don't know exactly what's wrong with that section. I've never seen anything I could point to and say, there, that's what it is. But something is off about that ground. I've known it since my first year here, and nothing in the decades since has changed my mind. Harold was the one who first made me aware of it, though he never explained it directly. It was fall of my first year, and we were working late because an afternoon burial had taken longer than expected. The sun was getting low, and Harold told me to take the shovels back to the shack while he finished tamping down the new grave. The shed sits at the edge of the property right up against the tree line that separates the northeast section from the woods beyond. I walked over there without thinking anything of it. I'd grown up in this town, and I'd been in the cemetery plenty of times as a kid. It was just a place to me back then. I was almost to the shack door when I heard footsteps somewhere behind me, back among the old stones. It was the sound of someone walking through dry leaves, I thought. So I stopped and turned to look, but the light was fading, and the oak trees back there were thick and old. Some of them have been growing since before the Civil War, and they cast heavy shadows, even in the middle of the day. I called out a hello, because I figured it was probably teenagers. We got kids in there sometimes looking for a place to drink or to try to scare each other. The footsteps, though, stopped as soon as I spoke. I waited for whoever it was to answer me, or to come out where I could see them. But instead of a voice, I heard something else. It was like someone trying to speak, but muffled, like someone trying to talk through a thick blanket. I then heard Harold's voice behind me, much closer than I expected. He had walked over from the gravesite without me hearing him approach. He simply said to me, "Come on, let's go," in this flat tone, and he took the shovels out of my hands. He put them inside the shack himself. He closed the door, and we walked back toward the front gate together. He didn't say a thing about it, and I was too afraid to ask. But after that, I did pay attention. I noticed how Harold never sent me to work in that corner alone. I noticed how when we did have to mow or trim back there, he always came with me, and we worked as fast as we could, not talking much, until we were finally finished. I also noticed the way he would sometimes stop what he was doing, and he would look toward those old stones, like he was listening for something. About 6 months before Harold retired, we were doing an early spring cleanup after the snow melted. I was raking leaves near the back fence, and I found a dead cat. Now that's not unusual in a cemetery, because strays do wander in sometimes. They do get old like all of us do, and they die, like anyone else does. But this cat had not been killed of old age. Something had torn it apart. The pieces were scattered over a wide area, much wider than you'd expect from a dog or a coyote or anything else that might attack a cat. I went and got Harold to show him. We went to the site, and he just looked at it for a long stretch of time, and he didn't say a word during that stretch. Eventually, he told me to bury the pieces and never mention it again. I was so confused and scared. I asked what he thought had done it, and he said he had no idea. But the way he said that made me think he had some idea, and he just didn't want to share it. There have been other dead animals over the years. Not many, maybe a dozen that I've found in all my time here. They're always in that northeast corner or close to it. They're always torn up the same way. But I just bury them, don't tell a soul, following exactly what Harold had told me. I've never seen what does it. I've heard things a few times late in the day when I'm working alone. These strange sounds in the trees, movement in my peripheral vision that's gone when I turn to look. One time I found these footprints in the mud along the back fence after a heavy rainfall. But they didn't look like any animal I could identify, and I didn't want to look at them for very long. The families who have plots back in that section sometimes complain that the graves look disturbed. They'll say the grass is torn up, or that the soil looks like it's been dug at. I tell them the same thing. Probably animals, raccoons, or groundhogs, and I go on ahead to fix whatever needs fixing. And that usually satisfies them. But what I don't do is tell them that I've seen those same disturbances myself, and that they're always worse on the older graves, those ones from the 1840s and 1850s, where the wooden coffins have long since rotted away, and there's nothing between whatever's in that ground and the surface, except a few feet of dirt. Well, I'm in my 60s now. I've been thinking about retirement for a while. The new kid, the college boy, he's not going to stay. He'll finish out the summer, then he'll go back to school, and he'll get a degree in something and have a career that doesn't involve digging holes. But eventually, someone will take over this job from me, just like I took it from Harold, and how he took it from the man before him. When that happens, I'll have to decide how much to tell them. Again, Harold didn't tell me much directly. He showed me by example. Stay away from the northeast corner when you can. Do not work there alone. Don't stay past sundown. If you hear something, Do not go looking for it. I've followed those rules for over 40 years, and I'm still here. Whatever's in that ground, I've learned to live alongside it. No pun intended. We have an understanding, I think. I take care of the cemetery, and I don't bother it. And it mostly leaves me alone. You know, for a time, my own mom was a lunch lady. Literally right up until I graduated into the school she worked at. Then she said, "So long, sucker, no freebies for you." It was sad, because my older brother got all the freebies while he was there. Now, was I jealous? Yeah. So maybe I'll go find that lunch demon and ask it to go stick its nasty little toes in my brother's mashed potatoes sometime. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can find me on X at Dark Prevails. Help this show grow by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or just follow and listen there. Simply search for Tales from the Break Room. You can also send me your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit. Here's to a big new year for all of us. I'll be clocking out till next time, but stay tuned, because I always come back. If you were out trick-or-treating, and a person in a werewolf costume began to chase you down a wooded trail, what would you do? And how would you be certain it was just a costume? Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can follow me on X at Dark Prevails, where I've been discussing boggy and scary movies. Tonight's episode features monsters galore. Some you'll recognize and others you won't. But all of them will have you so scared, you may never want to sleep again. Enjoy. Remember, I want to narrate your scariest stories of the unexplained, so be sure to send them to me at darkstories.org. Also, catch my other podcasts, where I narrate various other scary stories. Just search for Tales from the Break Room or Camping Horrors on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also just go to eeriecast.com. Now, let's begin. Warning: the following story contains depictions of self-harm and child abuse. My big sister's been replaced. From Anonymous. My big sister. She was everything every girl wanted to be. She was everything every boy liked, it seemed. She was everything everyone loved. My big sister was perfect in every way, or so one would think. She was a prodigy, insanely smart, skilled, talented, beautiful, kind. She was everything, and I was pretty much nothing. I was always the other daughter, but only people who couldn't see into the crap hole I called home would think I was jealous of her. I was glad I wasn't her. For the things she went through, I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. I've never seen her rest. Ever since I could remember, she took care of me while focusing on her studies and pleasing our parents. I felt bad. She was always more than a mother to me than a big sister. She would help me with homework, even though she was busy with her own. She would clean my room because I didn't feel like it. She would make me food. She would pick me up from school. Heck, she even went to all of my school events and parent-teacher meetings. She was amazing to me, and I was just an ungrateful little turd. I insulted her and called her names. I yelled at her. I would be so rude to her, and she just loved me. My sister was the only person who cared for me. Our parents never really bothered with me. They gave me more freedom than she could ever hope to receive. She was a prisoner in our own home, beaten until she was bruised and bloody for an imperfection in her work. When I was only 5, I remember her begging on her hands and knees. You see, she hadn't done too well in her physical education class, as she had twisted her ankle and it was left untreated. But our parents were seething. They slapped her. They told her to pack her bags because she was being put into an orphanage for being such a failure. She begged them to reconsider. She told me that day that love will always be earned, never given out for free. I remember her staying up all night doing homework and studying. Then she would cover up her unhealthy pallid skin and her dark eye bags with makeup, just so she could hide all her exhaustion, her bruises, her malnourishment. I remember reading her diary one time. She stared at me funny when I asked what SA meant. She was SA'd when she was 8 years old, then several times after that by her own mother. But now I know what it meant, and it makes me want to cry. The things she wrote in her diary were disgusting. I cried when I remembered what was written in it. I remember her reading to me and singing lullabies to me before bed. I remember when she showed me cool things she knew how to do. It was great entertainment, watching her ability to use both her right and left hands to do the same task equally well, like writing or drawing. I always loved when she did magic tricks for me. She was really good at card tricks, which I found very fun. I remember my sister asking our parents for the smallest things they would deny without a second thought. Nearly every girl has had a sleepover at some point, right? When her acquaintance from school asked her to come to one of her sleepovers, she asked our parents, and they said no. But she was also slapped when she tried to press the matter, trying to convince them to let her go. Forget sleepovers. My sister never even got to hang out with people. She had no social life, no life at all. She wanted to be a magician and an artist, dreams she would never get to chase, for she had to become a doctor according to my parents. She would just sit there, studying her life away. She was getting sick though. I could tell. I could see it. I would walk into the bathroom to her coughing up blood and washing it down the sink. I would see the scars on her ribs from the broken piece of glass she used to sink into her own flesh. I would hear her cry. She never cried in front of people, but sometimes you would hear a soft sniffle and a hiccup in the other room. I, on the other hand, I got to do whatever I wanted. I could go out with friends. I could dress however I wanted, sleep in, be late. I could do anything. I was an awful person. I could see her suffering clear as day, and I wouldn't give a single crap. That was until my sister went missing. She came into my room one night. She kissed my forehead with her frigid lips, her soft, cold hands brushing against my shoulder as she fixed my blanket. She whispered something inaudible and left, but not before leaving her bracelet on my bedside table. It was the last thing I had left of her. I never saw her again after that. Now you would think that everyone would absolutely lose their minds. She was the perfect prodigy of the small town we lived in. The town was so small, it didn't even make an indent in the map. Everyone knew everyone, so when the perfect daughter disappeared, you would assume that everyone would go searching for her, but nobody noticed. The next day, I woke up to a girl I've never seen in my life shaking me awake. My sister had silvery platinum blonde hair. Due to the lack of melanin, she had pallid cold skin and gray eyes. Yet this girl, she had medium blonde hair, blue eyes, and her skin looked like any normal Caucasian girl ever. Her voice was high-pitched, way too feminine to be the voice of my sister, who had a slightly deeper, yet quiet and feminine tone. I flinched as I saw this stranger above me. "Who are you?" I asked with annoyance. "Your big sister, silly. Come on, wake up. You're gonna be late for school." The girl grinned. Her face made me uncomfortable. Her blue eyes looked like the ones of a fish, almost, and her teeth were small. I don't know how to explain it, but she just looked so uncanny, so beautiful yet so repulsive. I got up and walked to the kitchen, where she served me a glass of orange juice and a plate of bacon and eggs. I stared at this girl. My sister knows I only like watered-down cranberry juice and her specialty strawberry pancakes. This was my second tell that this girl was not my sister. There was no way. Our parents walked into the room then with a smile. "Sweetie, you've got an exam tomorrow. Make sure you do your best," my mom said kindly to whoever this stranger was. My mom never spoke kindly. Sure, she had passive-aggressive moments, but those weren't kind. I went through my day watching everyone treat this girl as if she was my sister, calling her by my sister's name, laughing with her. I knew it wasn't her, and I knew it knew that I knew. Its smile was like a mocking, wizened monkey grin every time it looked at me with its disgusting fish-like eyes. It's been 7 months since it came here. I checked every possible thing to see if I could explain that it wasn't my sister, but I simply couldn't find anything to explain it. The pictures, videos, and even memories seemed to have been replaced. On everything where my sister once was, it was taken over by a creature I could not begin to understand. I don't know what happened to my real sister, but this wasn't her. I don't understand why no one else can seem to tell. I swear I'm not going insane. Everything that has been linked to my big sister has slowly disappeared. Her clothes, her artwork, everything. She was just gone with no trace. My sister's face is even slowly disappearing from my own memory. I can hardly remember what she looked like. I can only remember her voice, her soft weeping, her screams, but her voice is fading too now. It's replaced every trace of her existence. I don't know how to find my sister. I don't know what happened to her and what that vile thing is, but all I know is that it knows. It knows that I'm aware of its deceit, and it knows that I know that it isn't my sister. Trick or Treat, or Werewolf. From D and Ed. I don't think I'll ever look at Halloween the same way after what happened to me and my friends Amanda and Jacob one October night 8 years ago. It happened in our small town in Virginia. We were all just 13, excited to go trick-or-treating in our neighborhood like any other year. But our fun night of collecting candy took a terrifying turn after deciding to take a shortcut home through the woods. What we encountered out there in those dark trees ended up impacting me for years to come. It was Halloween night, really looking forward to going trick-or-treating with my friends. We'd been coordinating our costumes for weeks, until finally landing on this. I was going as a witch, Amanda as a black cat, and Jacob as a zombie football player. At around 6 p.m., Amanda and Jacob arrived at my house. "Whoa, love the costume," Amanda exclaimed. I smiled and thanked her, adjusting my pointy black hat. Jacob grunted, pretending to limp towards us like a stereotypical zombie. We laughed. After Mom took the obligatory photos, the three of us set out into the brisk October evening. Our neighborhood was filled with other kids and families, also out trick-or-treating. We went house to house, filling up our bags with candy, comparing who got the most chocolate bars so far. A couple of hours in, we decided to head towards the cul-de-sac at the end of the neighborhood, a place called Briarwood Circle. The houses there were huge, and we heard they gave out king-sized candy. As we walked, we started sharing scary stories, theories about what the best candy spots were, etc. I heard the Johnsons hand out full-size Snickers bars, Amanda said, excitedly, her black cat ears bouncing as she walked. "Yeah, but don't they always run out super early?" Jacob replied. "We'd have to get there fast." We quickened our pace, leaves crunching under our shoes. The full moon above provided an eerie glow to guide our way. As we turned onto Briarwood Circle, I felt a chill go up my spine. Something about this street always creeped me out, even though it looked similar to the rest of the neighborhood. Maybe it was the looming oak trees that cast ominous shadows, or the perfectly manicured lawns that seemed a little too perfect. Amanda and Jacob didn't seem to notice, as they compared candy hauls under a street lamp. I shook off the uneasy feeling and joined them. We continued trick-or-treating, oohing and awing over the generous treats handed out by the Briarwood residents. After hitting up the last few houses, we decided to cut through the small woods between Briarwood and my street to walk home. The worn dirt path was lit only by the moonlight. It was getting late, and a mist was starting to settle down between the bare branches. I hesitated before following Amanda and Jacob into the woods. "Guys," I said nervously, "maybe we should just walk back the regular way." "What's wrong? Scared?" Jacob chuckled. "No, it's just kinda creepy here," I replied, pushing some low-hanging branches out of the way. "Don't worry, it's not far," Amanda assured me. We continued on, leaves crunching under our feet. I couldn't shake the ominous feeling, like something was watching us from the dark. Then, we heard a twig snap from somewhere in the shadows. We all froze then. "What was that?" I whispered. Amanda and Jacob looked around cautiously. "It was probably just a squirrel or something," Jacob said, after a few silent, short moments. "Yeah, let's keep moving. We're almost there," Amanda added. We picked up pace, moving quickly through the woods. The full moon kept disappearing behind passing clouds, making it difficult to see the path. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Suddenly, another snap from a branch, this time louder and much closer. "Okay, I definitely heard that," Jacob said nervously. We huddled together on the path, peering out into the dark. "Hello?" Amanda called out timidly. "Is anyone there?" Silence. But then, heavy, plodding footsteps. The sound of fallen leaves being crushed under something much larger. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a squirrel. It wasn't even another person. "Run!" Amanda yelled. We took off down the path as fast as our legs could carry us. I could hear the footsteps behind us getting faster, gaining ground. I risked a glance back and screamed. Glowing eyes and the silhouette of a hulking creature barreled towards us. "Don't look back!" Jacob yelled. We broke through the tree line, sprinting across the open street. I was gasping for air by then, my lungs burning. We didn't stop until we reached my front door. We scrambled inside and slammed it shut, pressing our backs against it. Amanda and Jacob were wheezing, eyes wide with terror. "What the heck was that?" Jacob gasped. "I don't know. It was huge and fast," Amanda replied shakily. I peered out the front windows but didn't see any sign of it. My mind was reeling. Was it a rabid bear, a big dog, or something worse? I said something based on what I saw out there. "Guys, I think that was a werewolf." Jacob and Amanda looked at me incredulously. "Don't be ridiculous. Werewolves aren't real," Amanda said. "Then explain what that was," I shot back. "I saw it. It wasn't normal." Jacob ran his hands through his hair nervously. "I mean, it was pretty freaking huge, and I saw claws on it." Amanda shook her head. "No, it was probably just a big wolf then, or something, right?" She looked at us with pleading eyes. "Maybe," I replied half-heartedly. But deep down I knew we had narrowly escaped something straight out of a horror film that night. We all ended up sleeping at my place, too terrified to walk home, too scared to even go back outside. The next day, we returned to the path in the light of day, and we found giant paw prints in a few spots along the trail, much too big to be a regular wolf, and certainly not something a person would make. My friends desperately tried to come up with other rational explanations, but I knew. Every Halloween since, I get this uneasy feeling when night falls. and I'm terrified I'll catch a glimpse of glowing eyes watching me from the dark. School hostel haunted by a ghost from its past. From stressed university student. This was in 2019, my first year at my new high school, which was located 3 hours away from my hometown. This meant I lived in my school's hostel during the week, and I would go home on weekends. The school is over 100 years old, which meant it had its fair share of tales and rumors surrounding its history. I basically heard all of them my first week, from my roommates and friends. 2 of these stories, you could say, were proven. One story was that of a lady in white, haunting the school building itself. The other was a tale of a soldier that haunted the hostel. Supposedly, the school and its surrounding properties were used in the wars that took place in my country, as a base or a hospital. The soldier's spirit had allegedly been heard and seen by nearly all of my hostel friends, and one teacher even told her own story to us one night. I tried my best to brush off these stories, as I'm a firm believer in the supernatural and all that comes along with it, and I did not want to invite any sort of ghost to cross my path. Unfortunately, I did. One week during my school year, a public holiday fell on a Wednesday. I told my family it would be useless to come get me, as I would only be spending one day at home and I would see them on the weekend. Our hostel was divided by grade. Each grade had their own hall where they slept. Our hall was in an E shape, with rooms varying in size. I was in a 2-sleeper room, and with my luck, my roommate had left for both nights, and the rest of the hall did too. So I was the only person left there. My room was right above the stairs that led to the dining hall, meaning I was in the middle of the lowest line of the E-shaped hall. After school, I settled into my room, saying goodbye to all my friends, and I did some homework as I waited for the bell to ring for dinner. Dinner then came and went, so I showered. The bathrooms were located just next to the stairs, so just above the middle line of the E. Afterwards, I climbed into bed for the night. Later on, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They walked past my door towards the room located 3 doors from mine, the end of the last line of the E. At first, I thought it must have been one of the other students who were left in the hostel using the bathroom. But then I remembered I was alone here, so it would make no sense that students in other grades would use my hall's bathroom. I laid awake for a minute, listening as the footsteps slowly walked back down the hall and promptly stopped in front of my unlocked door. We weren't allowed to lock our doors. The footsteps then started running back to the other end of the hall. I tried to rationalize any explanation as to why some teacher or student would do such a thing. I rolled over to grab my phone, trying to see if it was already the early hours of the morning. But no, it was 1:32 a.m. Just as I unlocked my phone, the loud footsteps walked from the end of the hall. It sounded like heavy boots thundering against tiles. I ducked underneath the covers, like a child scared of the dark, thinking I was going to lose my life to some psycho who broke into the hostel. I was paralyzed with fear, too scared to unlock my phone, to call for help or anything. The footsteps grew louder and louder, then suddenly, right in front of my door, they stopped. The hall once again went dead silent. I held my breath, waiting for my door to creak open, praying to whoever was listening to save me. And once again, the footsteps started running back, echoing as they did. I lay in my bed for a minute, thinking about what I could possibly do to save myself. The thought of running to my hostel principal was a thought, but the heavens knew I was not fit, and no matter how fast my legs carried me, that thing in the hall would be faster. I kept on listening, figuring out its pattern. The thing would slowly walk from the other end of the hall to my door, then run back. This is important, as it influenced my next move. I made sure I wasn't just dreaming, pinching myself and almost dying when I realized it wasn't a dream. Any idea of sleep I had left had vanished by now. Those minutes felt like hours as I just kept listening, counting the seconds it took for the thing to run from my door to the end of the hall. Each time it seemed to be the exact same. 10 seconds. Hear me out. That hallway was not short. No human could cross it in that speed, so the thought of running away was gone. Tears gathered in my eyes as I realized it was do or die. Maybe I was being dramatic, but I was a 15-year-old girl who only had chopsticks to defend herself. So don't judge my actions here. I waited until those footsteps were as distant as possible before I jumped up and then saw my school bag. My school bag was pretty large. My school did have lockers, but you had to rent them, and I would much rather keep all my books in my bag. It may have been a stupid idea, but I moved my school bag in front of the door as some sort of protection, as quietly as I could. But the moment the bag softly scraped against the hardwood floors, that thing began to run back down the hall towards me. I didn't know what to do. I slammed my bag against the door and dove into bed. I listened then to these footsteps for who knows how long. Not once did they run towards my door. No, they walked slowly. I muffled my tears with my blanket as the thing stopped in front of my door, and I thought it would just stand there for a second, then leave. But no, it stayed there. The world went silent, not like it did previously. No, this time it was like that silence was a warning. Then I heard it. Breathing. Shaky, heavy breathing, like the thing was in pain. Worse yet, it spoke. "Help me." The words rang through the air. It sounded like a man's voice, but not fully. The words were almost forced out, hollowed, slurred. It sounded like death, to be honest. Distant yet so clear, if that makes sense. But not human. Not at all. Then came the banging. The sound was deafening, the cries for help now turning into screams that made my ears ring. Help, it called out over and over. That voice was filled with agony. It did its best mimicry of a human. I lifted my head from the covers, expecting to see my door open, but it was still closed. Not moving or budging at all, even though something outside continued to bang on it. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to scream, but nothing wanted to come out, and in a last-ditch effort, I whispered out, "Please leave me, please." My words were broken. And after that, everything went silent once more. I sat there in my bed, waiting for it to barge through my door, but nothing. Suddenly, the church bell, which was located on my school's property, rang once, then twice. 2 a.m. I couldn't for the life of me believe this all happened in half an hour. I sat there staring at that door until the sun rose, waiting and waiting, but nothing. At 7 a.m., the bell rang for breakfast, and you best believe I sprinted down that hallway, stopping the first teacher and telling her what the heck just happened. She, of course, wrote this all off, giving me permission to sleep in another grade's hall if I was so scared. "Gee, thanks," I mumbled as she walked away. I spent the rest of my day in the courtyard, swearing that that thing was watching me the whole time, sensing its eyes on me. I did end up sleeping in another hall that night, one that was the farthest from mine. And indeed, nothing happened, until I was awakened at 6 a.m. by that exact teacher telling me another student experienced the same thing. It soon became an entire ordeal. The hostel was searched in case someone was hiding somewhere, but that search led to nothing. I tried my best to just forget the night, as nothing further happened. But I did bring it up once with one of the women who worked in the kitchen at the hostel. She'd been working there for over 30 years, and by the look on her face, when I brought it up, that was enough to tell me what I needed to know. Don't ask, don't mention it, don't call it. I moved out of the hostel 2 months later as my father moved to the city, and I went to live with him. I was more than grateful. Up until moving, I did not sleep soundly in that place after nightfall. There were rumors in the 4 years I was still in high school that the paranormal activity in the hostel only got worse. It was so bad, they even called a priest. But my school kept those types of things very private. I'm not sure what I experienced that night. And I'm not going to try to find out, as I don't want to call it back to me. But I know 2 things for certain. That thing was not human, and I was not dreaming. I think the soldier who haunted the hostel made its presence known that night, and somebody called it back. Something on my family's ranch. From Cowpoke. I was 17 years old when this happened. I live on a ranch in West Texas. It was passed down to my family for generations. It mainly contains cows and horses. I grew up southern, living in the outdoors, learning how to be a rancher. Our ranch consists of a large acreage of woods surrounding the property. That's where I would spend most of my life. Country boy and cowboy. One day during the summer, my parents had gone off to France for a romantic vacation. They'd be gone for about a week. My dad left me in charge of being the man of the ranch. You might think it was crazy of them to leave me alone for a week. But I didn't mind, since I know how to do things around the ranch. Plus my dad trusted me enough to look out for the place. One thing I need to mention is that I have 2 older siblings, my brother and sister. But they're grown up and went to live their own lives. Now, on day 1, nothing happened. I spent the day doing chores, milking the cows, grooming the horses, and whatnot. On day 2, it was the same thing, aside from my girlfriend coming over. Other than that, nothing happened. On day 3, that's when the encounters happened. I was sitting on the back porch on guard duty. I remember I was holding my dad's rifle in hand, listening to some country music. But over the music, I thought I heard something else. I turned the volume down, and I listened. But I didn't hear anything else. It was starting to get late by then, so I rounded up all the animals in the barn, double locking the doors. I then felt an uneasy feeling, like someone or something was watching me from the woods. I turned around then, and I spotted a dark figure peeking out from one of the trees. I couldn't see who or what it was, since it was from a distance, and it blended in with the shadows. After all, it was pitch black out. But what I could make out was an arm. My first thought was a trespasser. I had my rifle with me, so I kept my finger on the trigger, and I spoke aloud. "Hey there, this is private property and you're trespassing. Move along. Nobody needs to get hurt." But the figure didn't move. I'm not sure if it even understood me. I don't know if I blinked or if I was hallucinating, because the next thing I remember, the figure was gone. Like it just vanished into thin air. At the moment, I didn't care about it, but something later that night would happen. I was playing Red Dead Redemption 2 with the volume down. Around that time, I began to hear a commotion coming from the cows. I ran out to the barn, once again armed with my rifle. When I got there, the barn door was smashed open, and I saw one of the cows had been killed and partially eaten. I almost vomited at the sight of it. I didn't see a sign of the culprit or attacker. Whatever it was long gone by then. I walked over to the carcass and got a better look. I remember thinking, dang it, what am I going to tell my dad? I took care of the body, but I was mad at whatever had attacked our livestock. I wanted to go after it and kill it, prove to my dad that I could take care of things like this. Soon, an idea came to mind. I decided to take the carcass into the woods and use it as bait to draw it out. I was certain it was some kind of wild animal. The next day, I got to work. I tied the remains of the cow to the end of my buggy, and I drove into the woods. I found a good spot to lay it as bait, and I also installed a hunting camera that can connect to my phone, so if it does show up, then I wanted to get it on camera. As I was installing it, I felt I was getting paranoid. It was like someone was about to pounce on me. Every sound around me made me more cautious. The woods where I thought I was safe had now turned into some sort of hunting ground. Once I was done, I headed back to the house and began to wait. While waiting, I remembered the dark figure I saw the other day. I began to think the two things were connected. That would also explain why we haven't seen a lot of deer and coyotes. I suddenly felt my phone vibrate. I checked it. Notifications from the hunting camera. I checked the images. All I could see was a silhouette, but there was definitely something out there. I had two choices. Go after whatever it was out there and kill it, or at least make it go away. Or let it be, but risk it destroying my family's ranch or harming my family. In the end, I decided to go after it, because it was out there right now, and there was no way I was letting this thing torment my home. I summoned up the courage and prayed to God to be with me and protect me. And so I made my way into the woods. I was scared, of course. I must have been out of my mind to want to kill this thing alone. But who am I going to call? Who's going to believe me? I was nervous with every step I took. All the noises of nature made me jump. I had my gun, but it didn't make me feel invincible. All of a sudden, it went quiet. The sounds of birds and insects left, and the wind died down. I then smelled a horrible stench, like rotting meat and death. I knew it was here. I then heard something behind me. A voice. It sounded like my mom, but I knew it wasn't. I gripped my gun and turned around. There was something standing there on two legs. Something taller than me. Much, much taller. Possibly around 8 feet. I stared at the thing, and it seemed to stare back. But then a voice came from it, a voice I'll never forget, because it sounded like my mother.
Run, honey.
This sent more than a shiver down my spine. I snapped out of my confusion, and I fired at it. The figure screeched, and I'd hoped I'd hit it. I kept firing at it until I felt it was enough. The thing ran away. I stood there for a minute, frozen. I guess I was processing what happened, but I felt proud knowing that I'd protected my home. And I didn't have to worry that what I fired at was a person, because I knew it wasn't. Because that figure, the one I mentioned was about 8 feet tall, also appeared to have antlers of some sort coming from its head. When my parents got back from vacation, I told my dad everything that happened. He was shocked, not sure what to say, but he said he was proud of me for fighting back. I never saw the thing again, but every time I go back into those woods, I bring a weapon with me, just in case it does come back. Always stay alert out there, especially when it comes to defending your home. Texas Skinwalker, from Emma Line. The memory of that dreadful night in the Texas wilderness still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. Jacob and I were always the adventurous couple, seeking thrills in the uncharted corners of our home state. But little did we know that one of our escapades would lead us to a nightmarish encounter with a malevolent being, something that we believe to be a skinwalker. It was a warm, moonlit evening when we decided to set up our campsite near a secluded creek. The rugged landscape was enchanting, with ancient mesquite trees and limestone cliffs adding an eerie beauty to our surroundings. As the night deepened, so did the strange noises echoing through the forest. At first, we dismissed them as typical wildlife sounds, but they soon grew unnerving. Whispers that seemed to twist and distort with the wind. With this unsettling feeling settling in, Jacob and I decided to take a short walk to shake off our unease. Little did we know, this decision would lead us deeper into the mysterious heart of the wilderness, away from the comforting glow of our campfire. As we ventured farther out, the moonlight cast eerie shadows on the landscape we thought we knew so well. It was then we saw it. Whatever it was, it stood among the trees, this grotesque figure with skin hanging loosely from its skeletal frame. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light that pierced through the darkness. Fear froze us in place as this creature shifted its form, a nightmarish dance of human and animal features. It whispered our names, and the voices it used resembled our loved ones, but with an added malevolence. Panic washed over us as we realized we were trapped in the presence of this wicked thing. Desperately, we tried to escape, but the forest itself seemed to conspire against us. Once familiar trees twisted, and I swear the creek nearby shifted its course, disorienting us at every turn. The skinwalker pursued us relentlessly, always just out of sight, but never far behind. We could hear it, every step of the way. Time seemed to blur in this nightmare. Exhaustion weighed us down as we stumbled through this labyrinthine forest. Then a revelation struck. We had to fight back, or we may not make it. Hearts pounding, we summoned our courage and turned around. We called out loud to any spirits of the land that could protect us. Suddenly all went quiet, before just as abruptly the skinwalker let out a blood-curdling screech, contorting and convulsing before vanishing into the night. The forest around us settled back into its natural state, the eerie whispers fading into the distance. We finally made it back to our campsite, shaken and scarred by the harrowing encounter. We packed our belongings hastily and fled the Texas hill country, leaving behind the horrors of the night. We promised each other never to go back and never to speak of this experience. Even so, that entity's presence haunted our dreams for years to come. From that day forward, we knew that some mysteries were better left unexplored. They could stay in the depths of the Texas wilderness for all we cared. It was inches from me, from the Creator's Guardian. I think I've experienced many paranormal things and even unknown creature encounters. Some of them were as unfrightening as the unexplained movement of a lamp. In contrast, I have a story of when I believe I was attacked by a skinwalker. Rather than boring you to death about a stupid ghost lamp, let's talk about the latter story. When I was around 17 years old, I took a walk in the woods to productively blow off some steam. I wasn't doing too well in my rigorous high school studies. My dad had cut a small entrance into the woods behind our house, so I went in and started my walk. At the moment, I wasn't really caring about anything at all. I found some coyote tracks before long, and I wanted to improve my tracking skills, not for anyone in particular. Even so, I began to follow them with no goal in mind. It wasn't like I was going to find this thing. The tracks looked pretty old anyway. However, something was off about them. As I followed them, they changed from the dog-like prints of a coyote to the elongated human foot-like shape of a barefoot man. I chalked it up to a coyote beginning to run in the mud, so its feet slid, making the footsteps look longer. I was near a river at this point, so there was indeed some mud nearby. At about 7 p.m., I lost those tracks, and at the same time, the sun was beginning to set. I began to track my giant boot-clad footsteps back to my house until I saw a third pair of tracks. These were not the tracks of an animal I'd ever seen, and I didn't see them on my way down. Was this creature following me? I began to panic. What if some rabid animal was stalking me? What if I was being hunted? Logic stepped in, and I thought of real reasons why these tracks might be here. Perhaps I hadn't seen them before, I thought to myself. But then, I heard breathing behind me. It sounded wrong, as if the person was breathing through a pillow. I didn't take any chances. I assumed it was some murderer or serial killer, so I noped it out of there at high speed. As I ran, I could have swore I heard footsteps behind me, closing the distance. Soon I emerged from the tree line. My chest burned, but overall, I was fine. I did not look back at the woods as I walked up to our house. I entered, breathless, but I was safe. I changed my clothes and thought I had escaped a harrowing encounter with some psycho impersonator in the woods. But I was wrong. So wrong. I wish it had all stopped there. Fast forward a couple of days of undisturbed peace. I was growing angry at my pre-calculus homework once again, and in my anger I decided to take a walk in the woods. I didn't even tie my hiking boot laces before I went in. Believe me, this is important. I was stomping through the woods when I noticed a set of huge footprints. These were deer hoof prints, but they were huge. I'm talking massive. Right away, I thought there might be some huge trophy buck in the woods. I tracked the hoof prints and soon noticed that this deer was either a mutant or very talented because it was walking on two legs. Two prints alternating from left to right and so on. This was odd, but my idiotic self thought nothing of it. At some point, a twig snapped, and I looked up to see two enormous yellow eyes staring back into mine. I gasped. I began to see its features. Patchy fur that seemed to be coming off. It was very lean and looked like it hadn't eaten anything ever. I could see its ribs quite clearly. I realized then it was stooping over very low to stare at me. I could very clearly sense this thing did not want me here. I remember thinking, sure thing, I'll leave, and I got the heck out of Dodge. However, it followed me lazily, as if making sure I was really leaving. As I ran, I saw a small rock, picked it up, and I threw it as hard as I could behind me. I think it connected, because whatever that thing was, roared. It sounded like a man, deer, and elk all at once, screaming together. I fell down and covered my ears. I then felt something hit me hard in the side, causing me to slam against a nearby tree. I howled in pain, as my ankle had been caught behind me and got sprained. I yelled in pain. I was on my back then, writhing, when through pained vision I saw the creature standing over me. It stooped even lower than before, getting right in my face and shrieking what sounded like, "Leave." I could smell something rancid on its breath. I thought that was the end, that I was dead meat. I was hurt and probably couldn't walk. I began to crawl away from it on my back. At the right distance, I struggled to get to my feet, and in a fit of hormone-filled anger, I screamed back, "I'm not dying today!" I ran, adrenaline-fueled, helping to block away the pain. This thing, what I believe was a skinwalker, shrieked again from somewhere behind me. I felt as if I ran forever, but finally I made it to our house and slammed the door shut. I limped painfully inside. I never did tell my family about this. In the end, I told my dad that some maniac had chased me through the woods. But my dad, being him, he knew I was lying about it. However, he didn't push or prod. I'm grateful for that. I think that if I hadn't run away from that skinwalker thing, at that exact moment, it would have decided to finally kill its play toy. To this day, I believe a skinwalker lives in the woods behind our house, and I'll never be hiking back there again. Scariest night of my life. From the Creator's Guardian. I don't even know where to start. This event was so traumatizing. I didn't sleep for almost 8 days straight, and barely even 8. This event happened 5 weeks back as of writing this. I was in the heat of my first year in college. The assignments were piling up, and I was not in the best mental state to begin with before this occurred. It was about 6 p.m. After driving home to my parents' house, I walked out on our deck to chill for a while. We have 5 dogs, one of which is an English Mastiff named Winston. We'd had Winston since he was a puppy, so I was accustomed to his moods. At the time, he was lying by my chair on the deck. Our deck faces east, which is where a pretty large forest is located. This forest is beautiful during the day, but at night it's pretty creepy. I live in a humid area, so in the early morning, there is a dense layer of fog in the woods. At around 6:30, one of our neighbor's dogs began to bark like a maniac. So I yelled out, frustrated, into the dark forest, "Please be quiet!" As if that would do anything, right? Of course, the dog paid no heed, but after about 4 minutes of howling and barking, an unearthly screech shook the woods. The forest went dead quiet afterwards, except for the dog. However, whatever made that noise forced the dog to be quiet, because soon after, I heard a final pained yelp followed by complete silence. It was then that I noticed in the trees there were these figures. They moved about at insane speed and made absolutely no noise as they did. During this, Winston was losing his mind, now growling with hackles raised. He barked then, and the figures seemed to retreat a little. If you have a Mastiff, and you've heard a defensive bark from one, you know it can be intimidating. I felt a bit more safe with my giant 170-pound dog at my side. Then there was this screeching sound, the same sound as before when the neighbor's dog went deathly quiet. "What the heck?" I said, dumbfounded. Then, all at once, those dark figures in the woods burst from the trees at an alarming speed. They seemed to fly. I grabbed Winston by the collar and shoved him inside the house, the two of us racing off the deck back inside. I wish it stopped there, but it got much worse. As I watched from a window, one of the black figures made their way to the area of the deck where I had been moments ago. Then it stopped moving, and I mean completely stopped, like they were statues. Then, even through the window I was watching through, I felt a rumbling thud, thud, thud of massive feet. Something larger was coming through the woods, emerging from the woodline. From what I could estimate, it appeared to be 10 to 11 feet tall, but I couldn't see much of its features, save for parts of its face. What I could see was a long snout on a skull-like face. It had these dangling patches of rotted flesh that looked like they used to be ears. And the eyes, I'll never forget them. They glowed yellow within its skull. It stared at me, freezing me in place. The fear I felt in my chest was indescribable and almost painful physically. Then it screeched, the same screech I'd heard while on the deck. The black figures flew towards my windows, black clawed hands desperately trying to reach in. All of a sudden, the black things cleared, and just above the deck railing, the screecher, as I called it, peeked at me. It seemed almost curious. Then, it turned around and walked back into the woods. It let out one final screech, and the black apparitions followed. I think they were that thing's minions. I know it sounds impossible, downright insane, but I know what I saw. If anyone knows what this screecher might be, what these black apparitions were, I'm all ears. The Scream, from Tiger Lily. This is a story told to me by my friend. I was 16 years old when she moved to my city. Not into the city, but to a nearby town, not too far. We became fast friends. For the sake of anonymity, we'll call my friend Maya. Maya lived in the woods, and once we became friends, she invited me down to stay the night at her parents' place. Nothing was out of the ordinary at her place. Her parents seemed to be regular, protective parents. We spent the day at a lake about a mile from the house. We snuck some malt beverages up there with us, relaxing and swimming. Looking back now, the silence in those woods was quite eerie. You'd expect to hear bugs or birds or anything, but it was just quiet that night. When it started getting too late, Maya and I packed up and left. Once we arrived back at the house, her parents were making dinner and chatting over wine. We ate with them, then headed back upstairs to Maya's room. The sunset cast an orange glow over everything, and it was that moment I realized I didn't have my purse. I swore I'd grabbed it when we left the lake, but we searched Maya's room high and low and found nothing. I was in tears because my phone and wallet and car keys were all in that bag, as well as the locket my grandmother had given me before she died. I was about to march right out the front door by myself to go and get my stuff when Maya stopped me. She pleaded with me to wait until morning, but I wasn't having it. The thought of someone else finding my things and having to explain to my parents the loss of those items was much too overwhelming at the age of 16. That's when Maya sighed and looked at her window woefully. "All right," she said, "but we have to wait until my parents go to bed in a little while. Then we have to go out the window, not the door." Time passed quickly enough, and soon we were climbing out the window, going down the trellis on the side of the house. The night was quickly becoming cool and crisp. I shivered, but continued on with Maya into those woods. Halfway to the lake, I felt as if someone was watching me. Just that paranoid feeling you get. I found myself looking around on occasion, but I didn't see anyone, even with my flashlight. Maya called for me to stay close to her, so I caught back up. The only sound I heard was branches cracking and the crunching of the ground under our feet. Down at the lake, we searched for my bag. It was so dark our flashlight seemed to be growing weaker. The chill in the air was also intensifying. I called over to Maya as the surrounding darkness became suffocating. Maya began whispering something, and I asked her to repeat herself since I couldn't yet understand. "What is that?" she asked. "What is what?" I replied. "That." She pointed behind me. I turned around and shone my flashlight in that direction. It was a pristine barn owl perched on a branch not too far above us. It stared at us for a moment before it opened its mouth and screeched. The first time wasn't that bad, but each time it screeched, it grew louder and louder until both Maya and I were covering our ears. There was something wrong. It could not be screaming that loud. It wasn't physically possible. I was terrified and began to run. I stopped running at some point to catch my breath, and I could still hear the screeching, growing in volume. The next thing I knew, I blinked, and it was morning. I was back at the lake, Maya next to me, both of us looking disoriented. We looked at each other then, but not a word was spoken. I didn't really care about my bag anymore at that point. When we made it back to Maya's house, crawling back into her room, we were both in agreement with how completely freaked out we were. Eventually, we concluded what we'd encountered was something supernatural, some sort of time loss event. Later in the day, we found my bag halfway smushed under her bed. It pains me to think about it, because either we just missed it and experienced something so terrifying for no reason, or someone had put it there. To this day, neither of us can account for the lost time out there in the woods, and neither of us have been back to that lake since. Thank you for listening to Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoy this show, think about supporting us. There are several ways you can. Search for EerieCast on your favorite podcast app and follow our other scary shows, especially the other two I host, Tales from the Break Room and Camping Horrors. Leave Unexplained Encounters a rating on Spotify and a review on Apple Podcasts. The more we get, the higher we climb in the charts. Get some cool merch at eeriecast.store, or unlock tons of cool extras like exclusive audiobooks and music tracks, ad-free access to all our shows, and a huge 20% discount on all our merch, all for less than $3 a month by signing up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. Thank you. Until next time, send me your scariest stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org so I can narrate them in a future episode. And follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at darkprevails for plenty of screams and memes. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.